Welcome, everyone. I am just incredibly thrilled to welcome you to part one of a very special, highly anticipated four-part deep dive miniseries.
It's going to be quite the journey.
Oh, it really is. We have a massive mission ahead of us today, and I am genuinely buzzing with energy just thinking about it.
I can tell.
Yeah, we are going on a dopaminergic sprint through the foundational concepts of a book that has completely rewired how I view human interaction. The book is Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if your life depended on it.
Written by former FBI lead international kidnapping negotiator Chris Voss, along with Tal Raz.
Exactly. Now, let me set the vibe right off the bat, because I know what you might be thinking when you hear the word negotiation. You probably picture, dry academic reviews.
The standard corporate boardroom imagery.
Right. You picture chalkboards, calculators, and the rigid, boring math of traditional bargaining. We are bypassing all of that today.
Completely bypassing it.
We are skipping the math entirely and diving straight into the messy, primal, deeply emotional machinery of the human brain. Okay, let's unpack this. We're taking the old school, rigid rules of bargaining and throwing them out the window.
Because to truly master any conversation, you really have to master the beast inside the mind.
The beast. I love that.
It's a profound shift in perspective, and I'm very glad to be here to help unpack it. If we look at the why behind this deep dive, it comes down to basic survival in our modern landscape.
Survival.
Yes, survival. We live in a world defined by information overload and constant, unending negotiation. And when I say negotiation, I don't just mean high-stakes corporate mergers or buying a car.
Although it obviously applies there, too.
Certainly. But I mean getting your teenager to put down their phone, or convincing your partner on where to go for dinner, or getting a vital project approved by a skeptical boss.
So basically every interaction.
Exactly. Every interaction where you want something from someone else is a negotiation. To survive and thrive in this environment, you must master the hidden emotional currents of conversation.
Because the traditional logic models they don't work, do they?
They simply do not account for the reality of human behavior.
Right. And let me ask you, the listener, directly. Have you ever felt completely paralyzed in a negotiation? Have you ever sat across from someone totally overwhelmed by their bulletproof logic, feeling like you're losing ground, but you can't articulate why?
We have all been there.
We really have. Well, today, we are giving you the cheat codes to hack that dynamic. And to do that, we have to start with a story that perfectly illustrates this clash of two very different worlds.
The Harvard story.
Yes, the Harvard hijacking.
Yeah.
It takes place in the storied intellectual halls of Harvard University. Picture this. Chris Voss, a former beat cop from the rough streets of Kansas City.
Who worked his way up.
Worked his way all the way up to become the FBI's top lead international kidnapping negotiator. He's handled 15 years of hostage situations from New York to the Philippines to the Middle East.
It is worth noting the rarity of that position. At any given time, there are 10,000 agents in the Bureau, but only one lead international kidnapping negotiator.
Only one. That is Chris Voss. And he walks into an executive negotiation course at Harvard Law School.
The contrast is immediately striking. You have the ultimate experiential practitioner stepping into the absolute world epicenter of negotiation theory.
Which is kind of intimidating.
It is. Voss was actually there to see if he could learn something from the business world, to widen his horizons. But things took a very different turn.
A completely different turn.
Robert Mnookin, the director of the Harvard Negotiation Research Project, learns Voss is on campus and invites him to his office. Mnookin is a titan in the conflict resolution field.
A literal heavyweight.
And shortly after Voss sits down, another heavyweight enters. Gabriella Bloom. She is a specialist in international negotiations and armed conflict.
And she's not just an academic, right?
No, she spent 8 years as a negotiator for the Israeli National Security Council and the incredibly tough Israel Defense Forces.
The IDF. So Voss is sitting across from these two absolute titans of intellectual negotiation. And then Mnookin's secretary walks in, places a tape recorder on the table, and hits record.
An ambush.
An ambush. Mnookin smiles at Voss and says, "We've got your son, Voss. Give us $1 million or he dies. I'm the kidnapper. What are you going to do?"
It's a sudden, high-stress scenario.
Can you imagine the panic? Even after 2 decades of dealing with real lives on the line, Voss admits he felt that flash of fear.
Which is a natural biological response.
Right. Mnookin gets testy, pushing him. "Come on, give me the money or I cut your son's throat right now." And Voss?
What does Voss do?
Voss just gives him a long, slow stare. He smiles. And he says, how am I supposed to do that?
What's fascinating here is the immediate cognitive dissonance this creates. Mnookin is expecting a traditional counteroffer, a plea, or an aggressive pushback.
Like, I'll give you 500,000.
Exactly. Instead, he gets a question that shifts the entire frame of the interaction. Voss isn't just playing dumb. He is deploying a highly sophisticated tool called a calibrated question.
A calibrated question.
Yes. It is an open-ended query that the other side can respond to, but it has no fixed answer. Mnookin assumes he has the power because he has the hostage.
Right, he's holding all the cards.
But Voss's question suddenly places the logistical burden of the demand squarely onto the kidnapper.
So Mnookin actually pauses, looking at Voss with a bit of amused pity, like they're playing two different games. He tries to regain control, asking, so you're okay with me killing your son, Mr. Voss?
Trying to force the guilt back onto Voss.
Exactly. And Voss counters with an apology, uses Mnookin's first name to seed warmth, and says, I'm sorry, Robert. How do I know he's even alive? I really am sorry, but how can I get you any money right now, much less $1 million, if I don't even know he's alive?
He is relentlessly maintaining that boundary.
He just keeps hitting them with these how and what questions. Gabriella Bloom jumps in to help Mnookin, trying the same bulldozer tactics, and she hits the exact same brick wall.
They cannot penetrate that defense.
Within minutes, Mnookin is red in the face with frustration. He literally cannot process the logistical hurdles Voss is forcing him to solve. Finally, Voss puts him out of his misery, and Mnookin has to admit, fine, I suppose the FBI might have something to teach us.
And that wasn't a fluke. A year later, Voss enters the Harvard Law School's winter negotiation course. He's paired up in a mock negotiation with a brilliantly languid Harvard student named Andy.
Oh, Andy. Poor Andy.
Andy has all the cutting-edge theories, the airtight logical traps, and the strict budgets. And Voss dismantles him.
Utterly destroys his budget.
He extracts literally every single dime Andy had, including the reserve money he was supposed to hold back. And Voss did it using the exact same tactic, just staring at Andy and repeatedly asking, how am I supposed to do that?
I can just picture the instructor, Sheila Heen, checking the scores, going red in the face, and letting out a gasp when she sees that Voss took every penny from this Harvard whiz kid. Andy had no idea what happened to him.
He was completely blind to the mechanism.
He felt like his own offers weren't good enough, so he kept bidding against himself. But why? Why does this work so effectively against people who are arguably much better educated in traditional negotiation theory?
To understand why, we have to look at the work of the brilliant psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize in behavioral economics.
Thinking fast and slow.
Precisely. In his incredibly influential book, Kahneman proved that human beings are not the fully rational, completely selfish actors that traditional economics assumed we were.
We are deeply flawed.
We all suffer from cognitive biases. Kahneman categorized the human mind into two systems. System 1 is our animal mind. It is fast, instinctive, deeply emotional, and largely unconscious.
Then System 2.
System 2 is the slow, deliberative, logical, and calculating part of our brain.
Hold on, before we go further, let's make sure everyone is on the same page regarding the traditional Harvard method, which operates entirely in System 2. The book mentions concepts like BTNA and ZOPA. What do those actually look like in a boardroom?
That is a crucial distinction. BTNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement.
Right.
It is essentially your walkaway plan. If this deal falls through, what is your next best option? ZUZO stands for Zone of Possible Agreement. This is the overlap between the lowest price a seller is willing to accept and the highest price a buyer is willing to pay.
So it's pure math.
Pure math. Both of these concepts treat the human brain like a pristine, frictionless conveyor belt of logic. They assume that if you input data A and B, the person will output logical decision C.
But that ignores the reality of how we process information. It assumes we are logical robots.
Exactly. I like to think of the human brain not as a clean conveyor belt, but as a sparking, chaotic factory assembly line.
A sparking factory assembly line. I love that imagery.
That factory floor is System 1, the animalistic, irrational, emotional beast. System 1 forms inchoate beliefs, raw feelings, and initial impressions. And here is the key. System 1 feeds the river of System 2.
So the emotion comes first.
Always. System 1's emotional reactions guide and steer our rational thoughts. If you only target System 2 with math and logic, your BTNAs and ZUPAs, you are ignoring the chaotic factory floor that is actually producing the decisions.
So we aren't throwing logic out completely, it's a sequencing issue. We have to clear the emotional roadblocks of System 1 before the logic of System 2 can even engage.
That is exactly right.
What does this mean for you, the listener? It means that when you are negotiating your salary or arguing with your partner about household chores, you have to stop treating them like a math equation. Address the animal mind first.
You must clear the floor.
When Voss asked Andy, how am I supposed to do that? He wasn't attacking Andy's logic. He was influencing Andy's raw emotional system 1, making Andy feel like his offer was somehow unfair or unworkable. Andy's system 2 then scrambled to rationalize that feeling by offering more money. The emotion drove the logic.
What is fascinating here is that if you can influence the raw emotional system 1 with a calibrated question, you hijack the rational system 2 into doing exactly what you want.
Hijacking the system.
It is a profound realization, and it fundamentally changes how we must approach conflict. But the FBI didn't arrive at this realization in a sterile laboratory. They learned it through tragedy, through blood on the tarmac.
The shift from brute force to emotional intelligence is a dark but vital piece of history. Let's look at the era before the 1970s. Back then, hostage negotiation in law enforcement wasn't really negotiation at all.
It was essentially non-existent.
It was basically talk to them through a bullhorn until you figure out how to shoot them. It was a brute force kinetic approach, and it led to absolute disasters.
Severe tragedies.
You had the 1971 Attica prison riots in upstate New York, where police went in with guns blazing, resulting in 39 dead hostages. You had the horrific 1972 Munich Olympics massacre, where 11 Israeli athletes and coaches died after a botched rescue attempt by the German police.
But the true catalyst for institutional change in the United States happened on an airport tarmac in Jacksonville, Florida, on October 4th, 1971.
Tell us about Jacksonville.
The country was experiencing an epidemic of airline hijackings at the time. In that highly charged atmosphere, an unhinged man named George Gift Jr. hijacked a chartered plane out of Nashville, demanding to be flown to the Bahamas.
Right, and the plane had to stop in Jacksonville to refuel. It was essentially a successful waiting game at that point. 2 hostages had even managed to convince Gift to let them go.
De-escalation was naturally occurring.
But the FBI agents on the ground became impatient. They reverted to the brute force playbook. They precipitously shot out the engine of the plane to prevent it from taking off.
A massive tactical escalation.
And that tactical escalation pushed Gifford to the nuclear option. In a panic, he murdered his estranged wife, he murdered the pilot, and then he killed himself. It was a completely avoidable tragedy.
And this time, the courts did not place the blame solely on the hijacker. The pilot's wife and Gift's daughter filed a wrongful death suit against the FBI. In a landmark 1975 decision, Downs v. United States, the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that there was a better alternative to protecting the hostages.
They literally told the FBI they messed up.
They stated that the FBI had turned a waiting game into a shooting match. Crucially, the court legally mandated that a reasonable attempt at negotiations must be attempted prior to any tactical intervention.
That is massive.
This was the paradigm shift. The New York City Police Department created the first dedicated crisis negotiation team, and the FBI soon followed.
So they start training negotiators. And what do they teach them? In the 1980s, they turned to the hottest book in the world, coming out of Harvard.
The quintessential System 2 manual.
They taught the FBI agents to be logical problem solvers. They taught them to separate the person from the problem, to focus on interests rather than positions, and to devise mutually beneficial win-win solutions. And for a while, it seemed incredibly smart and modern.
It was an intellectually brilliant system, but it possessed a fatal flaw when applied to crisis intervention. This became glaringly obvious in the 1990s during the disastrous sieges at Randy Weaver's Ruby Ridge Farm and Davy Koresh's Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas.
Those were absolute nightmares.
The FBI realized that intellectual, problem-solving books like Getting to Yes utterly failed when dealing with irrational actors. If we look at the broader implications, you simply cannot devise a mutually beneficial win-win solution with a man who genuinely believes he is the Messiah.
You can't logic your way out of madness. After Waco, the FBI had a massive reckoning. They realized that in the field, officers weren't dealing with rational bargaining over contracts. They were dealing with dynamic, intense, uncertain environments where people were in deep emotional crisis.
The chaotic factory floor.
Yes. If emotionally driven incidents make up the vast bulk of human conflict, then your negotiation skills have to laser focus on the animal, emotional, and irrational elements of the brain. Emotions aren't obstacles to be overcome. They are the very means of resolution.
This profound realization led the FBI to form the Critical Incident Response Group, or CIRG. They embraced psychology, counseling, and crisis intervention. They realized that before you can solve a problem, you have to establish rapport, gain trust, and persuade the other person of your empathy.
And to do that, they developed a set of highly tactical, seemingly simple conversational skills. Which begs the question, how do you actually talk to the animal mind, especially when someone is screaming at you?
That is where the practical application begins.
That brings up a fascinating biological concept called isopraxism. Imagine you're standing in an acoustic echo chamber. You sing a note, and the room perfectly tunes itself to your frequency, bouncing it back until you are both singing in harmony. That biological principle is what the FBI calls isopraxism. You and I know it as mirroring.
It is a deeply ingrained neurobehavior. Humans, and many other animals, naturally display this behavior, copying each other to provide comfort.
It's subconscious, mostly.
Yes, it is based on a profound biological reality. We inherently fear what is different, and we are drawn to what is similar. The old adage, birds of a feather flock together, is biologically accurate. Mirroring, when practiced consciously, is the deliberate art of insinuating similarity to build a subconscious bond.
But before we get to the words of the mirror, we have to talk about the delivery vehicle. We have to talk about your voice. Voss says your voice is your most powerful tool. It can intentionally reach into someone's brain and flip an emotional switch from distrusting to trusting. And there are 3 distinct voices you need to know.
The first is what Voss calls the late-night FM DJ voice.
I love the late night FM DJ voice.
This is characterized by a downward inflection. It is the voice of calm and reason. When you use this tone, you're signaling to the other person's nervous system that everything is under control. It literally lowers the counterpart's heart rate.
That is amazing.
Voss famously used this during the interrogation of Chris Watts, a getaway driver. When Watts got on the phone, Voss didn't ask a question. He just made a downward inflecting statement. "Joe's gone. This is Chris. You're talking to me now." It immediately established a calm authority.
The second voice is the positive or playful voice. This should be your default setting. It's the voice of an easygoing, good-natured person. And the key here, and this sounds so simple but it works, is to physically smile while you are speaking.
A physical smile changes the acoustic properties of your voice.
Yes. When you smile, even over the phone, it increases your own mental agility and collaboration, and it primes the other person to be more collaborative as well.
And finally, there is the direct or assertive voice. This voice signals dominance. It is almost always a mistake to use this voice in a negotiation.
Huge mistake.
It is the equivalent of slapping yourself in the face while trying to make progress. It triggers immediate pushback, either aggressive or passive-aggressive, from your counterpart's amygdala, which is the brain's fear center. You should almost never use it.
Okay, so you have your late-night FM DJ voice dialed in, or you've got a smile on your face for the positive, playful voice. Now, what is the actual tactic of the mirror? It is laughably simple, yet uncannily effective. A mirror in this context is simply repeating the last 1 to 3 critical words of what someone just said. That's it, just the words.
It seems almost too simple to work, but the data supports it brilliantly. Consider a study conducted by psychologist Richard Wiseman. He wanted to test the most effective method for waiters to create a connection with strangers.
The waiter study is mind-blowing.
He split waiters into 2 groups. The first group used positive reinforcement. When a customer ordered, the waiter would say, "Great, sure," or "No problem." The second group used mirroring. They simply repeated the customer's order back to them.
The results are astounding. The waiters who mirrored the orders received 70% higher tips compared to the positive reinforcement group. 70%, just by repeating the words back.
It bypasses logical resistance.
By mirroring, they triggered that biological instinct of similarity. The customer's unconscious mind said, "Trust this person, they are like me." But why does it work so well when there is conflict?
It has to do with cognitive load. When you mirror someone, you are forcing their brain to slow down and process their own words. It disrupts their anger loop. They have to pause and elaborate on what they just said, which gives you valuable time and keeps them engaged without you having to concede anything.
Let's test this. Let's do a quick role play. I am a drive-by boss. You know the type, the manager who suddenly swings by your desk with an urgent, poorly thought-out assignment that creates massive, unnecessary work. If you try to argue logically, using System 2, the boss interprets it as you being lazy or insubordinate and pushes back. So let's see how the mirror handles this. I'll be the boss. Ready?
Ready.
Hey, I know you just finished that massive consulting engagement and generated thousands of documents, but let's make 2 paper copies of all the paperwork.
I'm sorry, 2 copies.
Yeah, one for us and one for the client.
I'm sorry, so you were saying the client asked for a copy, and we need a copy for internal use.
Well, actually, I'll check with them. They probably don't need it. And we definitely don't need it. Just make a digital backup.
And scene. That is exactly how it plays out.
That was flawless.
By simply mirroring the words back with a calm, inquisitive tone, you effortlessly guide the counterpart to change their own mind. You didn't have to argue. You avoided a week of pointless copying.
It is a conversational Swiss Army knife. I challenge you, the listener, to try this today. Try it at the coffee shop. Try it in your next meeting. Try it with your kids. It will feel a little awkward the first time, but once you see it work, you'll never stop using it.
It becomes second nature very quickly.
But mirroring is just the surface. It's the gateway to a much deeper, more profound concept. We are moving from mirroring to tactical empathy.
This is where we truly elevate the conversation. Empathy is often misunderstood as a soft skill. People confuse it with sympathy.
Which is very different.
Sympathy is feeling bad for someone, agreeing with their values, or wanting to give them a hug. Empathy, in a clinical sense, is simply the ability to recognize the perspective of a counterpart and vocalize that recognition. You don't have to agree with them, you just have to understand their worldview.
Tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy takes this a step further. It is understanding the feelings and mindset of another in the moment, hearing what is behind those feelings, and using that understanding to increase your influence.
Think of the human mind as a complex 3D topographical mountain. When you look at a mountain from afar, you just see the surface shape. But tactical empathy is like sending out a sonar ping that reveals the hidden fault lines, the deep caves, and the treacherous emotional cliffs of the other person's fears, needs, and desires. You aren't just observing the surface behavior, you are actively mapping their emotional geology.
And this mapping process has a physical neurological basis. Researchers at Princeton University conducted an fMRI brain scan experiment studying neural coupling between speakers and listeners.
fMRI is functional magnetic resonance imaging, right?
Correct. It measures brain activity by detecting changes associated with blood flow. They found that when people communicate poorly, their brain waves do not align. But when a listener pays close attention and actively attempts to understand the speaker's perspective, their brain waves literally begin to align in a process called neural resonance.
Their brains sync up.
The best listeners can actually anticipate what the speaker is going to say next because their brains are acting in synchrony.
That is literal biological mind reading. Now, the book brings up Hillary Clinton's Georgetown speech as a prime example of the necessity of empathy. And let me be perfectly clear to you, the listener. We are taking absolutely no political side here. We're not endorsing or condemning Clinton or her critics. We are strictly reporting the source material's clinical tactical assessment.
A completely neutral tactical analysis.
Exactly. Completely devoid of political bias. Voss points out that, clinically speaking, her tactical assessment in that speech was completely accurate. She advocated for showing respect even for one's enemies and trying to empathize with their perspective. She was heavily criticized by pundits for this, called naive, or accused of sympathizing with terrorists.
But understanding an adversary isn't about endorsement. It's a tactical necessity. Empathy is not about being nice. It is about understanding the position the enemy is in, why their actions make sense to them, and what might move them. It is a clinical necessity of negotiation.
Devoid of any political bias, the tactical reality is that if you don't understand the enemy's worldview, you are flying blind.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, understanding the enemy is what the ancient military strategist Sun Tzu called the supreme art of war. Subduing the enemy without fighting. Tactical empathy is the mechanism by which you achieve that.
Subduing the enemy without fighting.
And the primary tool we use to vocalize that empathy and map the emotional mountain is called labeling.
Labeling the beast. Let's bring this to life with an incredibly tense anecdote from the book. Voss is outside an apartment door on the 27th floor of a building in Harlem. Inside that apartment are 3 heavily armed fugitives. They are trapped. Voss is there to negotiate them out, but he doesn't have a phone line to call them. He has to speak through the solid apartment door for 6 straight hours.
Imagine the tension in that hallway. In a brute force scenario, the negotiator would be shouting through a bullhorn, demanding surrender, telling them they are surrounded and have no way out.
Firing up the System 1 chaos.
Exactly. Voss knew that would only trigger their amygdala, their fear center, leading to a fight-or-flight response that could end in bloodshed. Instead, he used his late-night FM DJ voice, and he didn't demand anything. He simply recognized and verbalized the predictable emotions of their situation. He labeled their fears.
He spoke through the door and said things like, "It seems like you don't want to go back to jail. It looks like you don't want to get hurt." He didn't ask them what they wanted. He stated what they were feeling. Give someone's emotion a name, and you show you identify with how they feel. After 6 hours of this calm, relentless labeling of their fears, all three fugitives surrendered peacefully. No shots fired.
The mechanics of labeling are very precise. You must use neutral phrases. The standard structures are, it seems like it sounds like, or it looks like. Notice a very crucial rule here. You never begin a label with the word I. You do not say, I'm hearing that you or I think you feel.
Wait, I have to push back on that. I use I feel statements all the time. Couples therapy always says to use I feel statements so you don't sound accusatory. Why is Voss saying the exact opposite here?
It is a common piece of advice, but in this specific context, the word I immediately gets people's guard up. It signals that you are more interested in yourself and your own perceptions than in them.
That makes sense.
It also makes you take personal responsibility for the words that follow, which means if you mislabel, they might take offense at you. But when you phrase it as a neutral statement, it seems like it is an observation. If you are wrong, they will simply correct you without offense. I didn't say that's what it was. I just said it seems like that. It is a much safer, more effective way to probe their emotional state.
It's brilliant defensively. And the final rule of labeling, much like mirroring, is absolute silence. Once you throw the label out there, you must bite your tongue and let the label do the work. We all have this terrible habit of stepping on our own brilliant points by filling the silence. We want to say, it seems like you're upset about the contract. Is there a specific clause you hate? No. Just say, it seems like you're upset about the contract, and let them fill the void.
And there is hard neuroscience backing up why labeling works so effectively, particularly on negative emotions. We return to the amygdala, the brain's fear center. A brain imaging study conducted by psychology professor Matthew Lieberman at UCLA showed that when people are shown photos of faces expressing strong, negative emotion, the amygdala lights up with activity.
An alarm bell goes off.
But when the subjects were asked to consciously label the emotion they were seeing, applying a rational word to a raw feeling, the brain activity literally moved away from the amygdala and into the areas that govern rational thinking.
Here's where it gets really interesting. By exposing a negative thought to daylight, you instantly shrink it. You disrupt its red intensity. Labeling a fear literally hacks the biology of the brain, calming the counterpart down. It's a time-saving emotional hack.
Which brings us to the most counterintuitive and perhaps most powerful application of tactical empathy and labeling in the entire book, the accusation audit.
The accusation audit.
If labeling a negative emotion shrinks it, then the accusation audit is about proactively detonating all the negative emotions before they can even be used against you. The first step is to list every single terrible thing your counterpart could possibly say about you, and then you say them out loud before the other person has a chance to.
It sounds insane. The first time people hear this, they think, I can't do that. I'm just giving them ammunition. But it works brilliantly. Voss does this on the first day of his negotiation class at Georgetown. He stands up and tells the class they're going to do a role play called 60 seconds or she dies.
High stakes right away.
Right. He plays a kidnapper, and a student has to convince him to release the hostage in 1 minute. But before he asks for volunteers, he audits their accusations. He says, in case you're worried about volunteering to role play with me in front of the class, I want to tell you in advance, it's going to be horrible. You are going to freeze, you're going to look stupid, and the hostage is going to die.
And the result? The entire class laughs. By proactively labeling their deepest fears about looking foolish in front of their peers, he completely defuses the tension. The unreasonable fear suddenly seems much less forbidding when spoken aloud in the sunlight.
He takes all the power out of the fear.
He always ends up with more volunteers than he needs. If he had tried to reassure them by saying, don't worry, it won't be that bad, he would have validated their fear. By leaning into the worst-case scenario, he took the sting out of it entirely.
Let's look at a high-stakes business example of this. Anna and Mark are representing a small company, and they are pitching to a huge corporation, ABC. But there's a problem. ABC feels that Anna and Mark's company bait and switched them on a previous deal. So Anna and Mark walk into the meeting, and instead of defending themselves or trying to smooth things over, Anna opens the meeting with an accusation audit.
She goes right at the elephant in the room.
She says, you may feel like we have treated you unfairly. We acknowledge that you believe you were promised this work. You're going to think we are a big, bad prime contractor when we are done.
It's a brilliant piece of theater. By laying the worst accusations bare immediately, she acknowledges ABC's situation and shifts the dynamic from hostile confrontation to a safe zone of empathy. Because she voiced their grievances so accurately, ABC's representative felt a human need to actually soften the blow.
Wait, the aggrieved party softened the blow.
Yes, the representative literally responded, "This is not a good situation, but we appreciate the fact that you are acknowledging what happened, and we don't feel like you are mistreating us, and you are not the big bad prime." By auditing the accusation, Anna completely neutralized it.
It is so incredibly powerful, and it works in everyday life, too. Voss tells the story of his student Ryan at the airport. Ryan is trying to get rebooked on a flight after massive weather delays. He watches the ticket agent, Wendy, getting yelled at by angry customer after angry customer. Ryan walks up to the counter, uses his late-night FM DJ voice, and instead of demanding a ticket, he says, "Hi, Wendy. I'm Ryan. It seems like they were pretty upset."
A perfect label. He acknowledges her reality. Wendy, relieved to be treated like a human being, starts elaborating on the nightmare weather delays. Ryan listens and mirrors her words. "The weather?" he asks. She talks more. He uses another label. "Seems like it's been a hectic day."
Just continuously validating her experience.
Within 2 minutes, by simply labeling the negative environment and mirroring her responses, he built a deep rapport based on empathy. And Wendy ended up finding him a seat on a flight that was supposedly sold out, moving him to premium seating for free.
Humans always present a surface behavior. The cranky grandfather at Thanksgiving is the surface behavior. The underlying motivation is the fact that he is lonely and misses his family. The angry ticket agent is the surface behavior. The underlying emotion is feeling unappreciated and attacked. When you use labels and accusation audits, you are targeting the root, not the symptom. You are mapping the 3D mountain.
Exactly. And once you map that mountain, you are no longer a victim to the unpredictable terrain. You are a guide.
What a dopaminergic sprint this has been. Let's recap the ground we've covered today. We started by exploring how to sequence the robotic System 2 math of traditional negotiation. We didn't throw out zoo PAs and Bayesian A's entirely, but we recognize that they're useless until you clear the emotional roadblocks first.
Clearing the factory floor.
We acknowledge that the human brain is a sparking factory assembly line driven by the emotional animalistic System 1. We learned the history of how the FBI shifted from brute force tactics on the tarmac to deep emotional intelligence. We explored the acoustic echo chamber of the mirror, repeating the last 3 words to force cognitive load and build subconscious rapport.
And we mastered the voices.
Yes, dialing in our downward inflecting late-night FM DJ voice to lower heart rates. We learned to map the emotional geology of our counterparts using tactical empathy, deploying neutral labels like "it seems like" to shrink the amygdala's fear response. And finally, we learned the preemptive strike of the accusation audit, listing the worst possible things they could say about us to neutralize the negative and build trust. You are now armed to map the emotional mountains around you. And remember, this is only part 1 of our 4-part deep dive mini-series. The foundation is set.
It is a profound set of tools. But I want to leave you with a lingering, unmentioned concept to chew on as we conclude this deep dive. We've spent this entire time talking about how to use tactical empathy, neural resonance, and carefully calibrated vocal tones to hack human biology in high-stakes, human-to-human interactions.
Yep.
But consider the digital age we are accelerating into. If we can bypass the rational brain and hack a hostage-taker's amygdala with a few perfectly calibrated words, a soothing tone, and a mirror, what happens when artificial intelligence learns to do this to us? When an algorithm can perfectly read your micro-expressions through a camera, adopt a flawlessly synthesized digital FM DJ voice, and perform a hyper-personalized accusation audit on your deepest, most hidden insecurities. Are we preparing ourselves for an era where the ultimate hostage negotiators are machines?
Whoa. That is a terrifying and fascinating thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us for part 1 of this deep dive. We will see you back here for part 2. Until then, stay curious, keep practicing your mirrors, and we will catch you next time. Paint this picture in your mind for a second. You have just sat down for dinner. You've got a hot plate of food right in front of you. You've just taken a breath after a long, really exhausting day.
The best feeling.
Right. The house is finally quiet, and then the phone rings.
Oh, no.
You pick it up, and before the person on the other end even finishes their very first syllable, your stomach just completely drops. It is a telemarketer.
We all know that exact, that visceral physiological response, The tightened jaw,
Yeah.
the shallow breathing.
Your posture completely changes. Suddenly, you're defensive in your own kitchen. You feel this bizarre, creeping sensation of being completely trapped in a conversational flowchart.
Amaze.
A maze, exactly. One that has been engineered by a team of behavioral psychologists in a boardroom somewhere to force you into saying one single terrifying word.
Yes. They always lead with something seemingly innocuous,
Yeah.
like, do you enjoy a nice glass of water?
Right, and you're thinking, well, obviously, yes, but
And like me, I bet you prefer crisp, clean water with no chemical aftertaste, exactly the way Mother Nature intended, right?
and you're sitting there sweating, thinking, I just want to eat my dinner. But you are socially conditioned to be polite, so you just keep handing over these little hostage tokens of yes.
It's brutal.
Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Today, we are picking up exactly where we left off. This is part 2 of our 4-part mini-series exploring this groundbreaking hostage negotiations source material.
If part 1 was about laying the foundation of active listening, today is about tearing down the conventional wisdom of bargaining. We are taking the gloves off.
Consider this your vibe check for today. This is going to be a high-velocity, dopaminergic sprint. We are hacking the human brain's baseline code.
We really are.
Today's deep dive covers the exact middle of our sources. We are exploring why you should absolutely fear the word yes, how to hunt for the 2 sweetest words in the English language, which, spoiler alert, that's right, and how to literally bend your counterpart's reality to your will. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's start by analyzing that telemarketer scenario because it beautifully illustrates the massive cultural lie that we have all been sold regarding the word yes.
It really is a cultural obsession. I mean, society has entirely fetishized yes. We are told from birth to be yes people.
Right.
Say yes to opportunity, say yes to the universe. Getting to yes is treated as the holy grail of every single business interaction, every sales pitch, every diplomatic treaty. But our sources are telling us that we have the entire paradigm completely backward.
What's fascinating here is that yes is incredibly dangerous because it is so often a meaningless counterfeit dodge. In the context of human negotiation, there are really 3 distinct types of yes, and only one of them is actually valuable.
I'll lay out the first 2. First, you have the commitment. Yes, this is the real deal. This is an agreement that leads to action, a signature on a contract, a true meeting of the minds.
The one we actually want.
Exactly. Second, you have the confirmation. Yes. This is mostly innocent. It's a black and white response to a straightforward question. Did you bring the files? Yes. But those aren't the ones causing the problem.
No, the problem is the third type, the counterfeit yes. This is the one the telemarketer is usually harvesting. This is the yes someone gives you when they desperately want you to stop talking.
Oh, I know that one well.
They use it to escape the conversation or to string you along without actually committing to a single thing.
Yeah.
It is a social defense mechanism.
It's the yes we give when we feel backed into a corner. When that telemarketer asks, do you drink water? You say yes, because you physically cannot argue with the premise, but your brain is screaming, how do I get off this phone?
Right.
You aren't committing to buying a $2,000 water filtration system. You are just trying to survive the flow chart so you can hang up.
And that is precisely why pushing for yes right out of the gate makes people so incredibly defensive. It raises their hackles. They feel like prey being backed into a trap. If you are making your counterpart feel like prey, you are completely destroying any chance of a collaborative negotiation. The moment they feel manipulated, trust evaporates.
So if yes is a trap, what is the antidote? Here's where it gets really interesting. The antidote is the sanctuary of no.
The sanctuary of no, for a master negotiator, no is pure gold. We have this deep-seated psychological fear of the word no because we associate it with rejection, with personal failure, with the absolute end of the line.
Right, it feels like a door slamming in your face.
But we have to completely reframe that architecture. No is not a failure. It's a reaffirmation of autonomy.
Autonomy is the key word there. It's about putting the other person in the driver's seat of their own boundaries.
Think about the underlying physiology. When you feel pressured by a salesperson, your heart rate elevates. Your amygdala, the fear and threat center of your brain, starts firing. You are in a mild state of fight or flight. But the moment you are allowed to say no, what happens to your body?
You exhale, the tension drains right out of your shoulders. You realize you aren't trapped.
Your heart rate literally drops. No provides an oasis of safety. It maintains the status quo, which the human brain loves. It protects us from scary, unknown changes. When someone says no, They feel they have successfully protected themselves from you.
That makes so much sense.
And paradoxically, once they feel protected, they finally feel safe enough to actually listen to what you have to say.
Our sources reference Jim Camp's concept of the right to veto. This is a massive paradigm shift. If you give your counterpart explicit permission to say no right from the beginning of the interaction, you calm their amygdala immediately.
Instantly.
You are basically handing them the keys to the conversation and saying, I'm not going to trap you in a flowchart. You can leave whenever you want.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is all about the deep, universal human need for control. People will fight to the death to preserve their right to say no. So if you just grant them that right up front, the environment instantly transforms from adversarial to collaborative. You remove the threat.
Let's look at how to actually apply this in the real world, because the linguistic pivot is ninja level. Let's go back to our telemarketer. The standard industry-wide opening is always something like, do you have a few minutes to talk?
Which immediately triggers that defensiveness. The recipient thinks, what are you going to ask me? How long is a few minutes? Are you going to trap me?
But what if they flipped it? What if they intentionally triggered a no instead? What if the opening line was, is now a bad time to talk?
It changes the entire power dynamic. If it really is a bad time, let's say, yes, it is, and you ask when a better time would be, you've respected their time. But very often, people will say, no, it's not a bad time.
And boom.
Boom. By saying no, they have explicitly granted you permission to speak. They feel completely in control of the interaction, and because they chose to let you speak, you now have their total undivided focus.
You are using their biological need for safety to open the door. Our sources share a wild anecdote about a political fundraiser named Ben Ottenhoff to prove just how powerful this script flip can be. And just to be completely clear to the listener, we are strictly focusing on the linguistic mechanics of the language here. We are entirely neutral on the politics involved. The psychology is what matters.
The mechanics are universally applicable. So Ottenhoff had been using a traditional yes pattern script for his entire career. You know, the drill.
The classic trap.
Exactly. The script read, do you believe in these values? The donor says yes. Do you want better things for your community? Yes. Will you donate to our candidate? And then click, they hang up.
He was harvesting counterfeit yeses. The donors were agreeing with the broad, undeniable premises just to get through the call, but when the actual commitment was requested, the trap snapped shut and they bailed.
So Ottenhoff completely threw out the playbook.
Yeah.
He changed the script to actively hunt for no. Instead of asking for agreement, he started asking things like, do you want to see our candidates lose? Or, if you don't do anything, do you think things will improve on their own?
And the psychological reaction is immediate. The donor vehemently says, no, I definitely don't want them to lose.
And by saying no, the donor is defining their own boundaries and their own desires. They are actively defining what they do not want to happen. Once a human being verbally defines a negative outcome they want to avoid, they naturally move toward taking action to prevent it.
That is wild.
Ottenhoff completely revitalized his fundraising numbers simply by letting people feel the safety and conviction of saying no.
It's incredible, but this raises a tactical question. What if the person you're dealing with isn't even giving you the courtesy of a conversation? What if they're just stonewalling you? How do you force a no out of them to get the ball rolling when they refuse to engage?
The sources offer a brilliantly counterintuitive, slightly antagonistic tactic for this exact scenario, intentionally mislabeling their emotions or their desires.
I love this concept. Human beings have this compulsive need to correct the record. Explain how this works in practice.
Let's say you're talking to a vendor or a colleague who just isn't engaging with your proposals. You can throw out a statement that you know is factually totally wrong.
Yeah.
You look at them and say something like, it seems you want this project to fail.
That is a highly provocative statement. You are directly attacking their professional intent.
It is provocative, but it taps into a fundamental human quirk. We cannot stand to be misrepresented. If someone states something inaccurate about our motives, we feel an overwhelming urge to correct them. So what do? They immediately snap back, no, that's not it at all. I want it to succeed, but I'm worried about the budget constraints you haven't addressed.
And there's the gold. You got the no, you broke through the defensive stonewalling, and they just handed you the actual underlying issue, the budget all, because they were so eager to correct your intentional mislabel.
It forces them to engage, and strangely, it makes them comfortable because they are correcting you. In their mind, they are in the position of power because they hold the correct information.
Okay, that leads me to my absolute favorite tactic from this entire section, the email magic. This is the ultimate No-oriented silver bullet tactic for when you're being completely ghosted. You've sent 3 polite follow-up emails. Just bubbling this up to the top of your inbox, nothing. You feel invisible.
The polite follow-up is the bane of modern communication. It signals low status and desperation.
The sources give us a one-sentence email to shatter that dynamic, just one sentence. The subject line can be blank or just the project name. The body of the email is simply, have you given up on this project?
It's a masterpiece of behavioral economics in a single sentence.
I want to dive deep into why this works so flawlessly. Because on its face, it feels almost rude.
It works because it triggers a deep psychological mechanism called loss aversion. We will explore the academic roots of this later when we discuss Daniel Kahneman, but essentially, loss aversion means that human beings fear losing something much more than they desire gaining something of equal value. When the recipient reads that email, have you given up on this project? They feel an immediate threat to their status and their autonomy.
Because the email implies that I am about to walk away. It implies that I am closing the file on my terms, not theirs.
That's the key. By asking if they have given up, you are threatening to take a decision out of their hands. To stop that from happening, to cut their losses and reestablish their power in the dynamic, their natural inclination is to reply immediately. They will write back, no, we haven't given up. Our priorities just got shifted this week. Let's jump on a call tomorrow.
Wow.
You demand a no, you give them the illusion of control, and you get your response instantly.
So what does this all mean for the listener sitting at home or driving to work? It means you have to radically audit how you communicate. You are currently being held hostage by your fear of rejection. We twist ourselves into knots trying to get people to say yes, and we just end up sounding like that sweaty, desperate telemarketer. Letting go of the need for yes takes the handcuffs off. You have to realize that no is the start of the negotiation, not the end of it.
Which transitions perfectly into our next segment. Because if yes is a counterfeit trap and no is merely the beginning of the conversation, what is the actual destination? What is the holy grail of connection?
We are entering segment 2, hacking the matrix with...
That's right.
And to set this up, we have to travel back to August of the year 2000, deep into the steaming jungles of the southern Philippines.
A profoundly high-stakes environment where communication literally means life or death.
It's intensely cinematic. A radical militant group known as Abu Sayyaf has captured an American CIA agent named Jeffrey Schilling. The FBI is brought in, and Chris Voss is the lead negotiator. He's on the phone with the rebel leader, a guy named Sabaya. And Sabaya is not asking for a typical ransom of $1 million in a getaway helicopter. He is making these absolutely delusional, historically impossible demands. He wants war damages from the United States government for events that happened in 1899.
He is leveraging a modern human life to demand historical reparations for a naval bombardment that happened a century prior.
It's completely irrational. The U.S. government cannot and will not cut a check for an 1899 military action. So how does an FBI agent handle a guy making impossible demands while holding an American hostage? If you tell him he's crazy, he kills the hostage. If you agree with him, you're making a promise you can't keep.
They rely on a behavioral framework developed by the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit. It's called the Behavioral Change Stairway Model, or the BCSM. It is a strict 5-step process designed to shift someone from a state of violent conflict to a state of voluntary cooperation.
I want to map out these stairs, because this isn't just for hostage negotiators. This is the architecture of human influence. Step 1 is active listening. This isn't just waiting for your turn to speak. It's profoundly hearing the underlying emotions and data the other side is projecting.
Right.
Step 2 is empathy. And this is tricky because empathy doesn't mean agreement. It means understanding their worldview, even if you think their worldview is abhorrent.
That distinction is vital. Step 3 is rapport. Rapport is what happens when empathy is actually felt and recognized by the counterpart. It builds a fragile bridge of trust. Step 4 is influence. Once trust is established, and only then, you earn the right to suggest solutions or point out flaws in their plan. And finally, step 5 is behavioral change. They actually take the action you need them to take, like releasing the hostage.
The crucial, unbreakable rule here is that you cannot skip steps. You cannot jump from active listening straight to behavioral change. You can't say, I hear that you're mad about 1899, now let the guy go. The stairs will collapse.
And that leads to a profound psychological concept at the heart of the BCSM. Unconditional positive regard. It's a term originally coined by the humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers. In a clinical setting, it means the therapist accepts and supports the client exactly as they are without evaluating or judging them.
Wait, unconditional positive regard? That sounds like intense therapy. Are you telling me an FBI agent is doing humanistic therapy with a heavily armed terrorist?
In a highly tactical way, yes. It means stripping away your own judgment. When Voss was talking to Sabia, he couldn't project disgust or superiority. He had to accept Sabia's reality as true to Sabia. They didn't argue history. They didn't pull out a textbook to prove him wrong about the 1899 bombardment. If they had done that, they would have been locked in an intellectual battle of egos, completely destroying any chance of rapport.
Because arguing facts fundamentally invalidates the other person's reality. If you tell someone their core belief is factually incorrect, their brain perceives it as a physical attack.
Precisely. Instead, the FBI used the tools we discussed in Part 1. Silence, minimal encouragers, mirroring, and most importantly, emotional labeling. They made Sabaya feel completely, utterly heard. They acknowledged his anger. They acknowledged his deep feeling of historical injustice and disrespect.
And they systematically pushed him up the stairway toward this massive breakthrough moment. But the breakthrough wasn't getting the terrorist to say, yes, I will release the hostage. The breakthrough was getting him to say, that's right.
What's fascinating here is that those two words change the entire chemical makeup of a negotiation. When your counterpart says, that's right, it signifies a subtle, almost invisible epiphany. It means that they have completely internalized your summary of their reality. It proves that unconditional positive regard has been successfully established.
It's them looking at you, dropping their weapons metaphorically and thinking, wow, you actually see the world exactly the way I see it.
And once you reach, that's right, you have successfully climbed the stairway to the influence step. You have suspended their defensive disbelief. You now have permission to persuade.
Okay, but we have to make a massive flashing neon light distinction right here. Because that's right, is absolute magic. But you're right, is a complete disaster.
It is a critical difference. They sound grammatically similar, but psychologically, they exist in entirely different universes.
The sources use this brilliant anecdote about a kid named Brandon, a massive high school football player. He plays on the defensive line, he's 250 pounds, he loves hitting people, but he struggles with some of the finer technical aspects of the game. When his coach pulls him aside and gives him a highly detailed, accurate critique of his footwork, what does Brandon say?
Brandon nods dutifully and says, "You're right, coach."
You're right. And then Brandon jogs back onto the field and does exactly the same wrong thing he was doing before. Why? Because you're right is the polite brush off.
When we say you're right, we are deploying a defense mechanism. What we are really saying is, I concede that your logic is technically sound, but I have absolutely no intention of changing my behavior, and I am agreeing with you solely so you will stop talking to me. It protects the ego. It concedes the argument without conceding any actual behavioral ground.
We do this all the time in our personal lives. When a spouse or a parent is giving you unsolicited advice and you just want the agonizing conversation to end, you say, you know what, you're right. And the conversation stops. But you haven't internalized a single word of it. You're right is a pacifier for the other person's ego. That's right is a profound validation of your reality.
If we look at a business example from the text, it illustrates this perfectly. There's a story of a student who was trying to secure a very specific, newly created job role at his pharmaceutical company. But to get it, he had to win the approval of a specific boss who was notoriously assertive, highly aggressive, and a massive penny pincher.
The absolute worst kind of boss to pitch a new expense to.
The type who shuts down ideas before you even finish the first sentence. So the student knew that going in with a glossy PowerPoint presentation, arguing why he deserved the job, would fail. He knew that using logic to try and force a yes would just result in a counterfeit agreement or a flat rejection. Instead, he used a tactical summary to trigger a, "That's right."
Let's unpack the exact formula for this because this is highly actionable for the listener. How do you construct a summary that forces a, that's right?
A true summary is not just parroting back what they said. It requires deep cognitive empathy. The formula is a label plus paraphrasing. First, you have to identify the underlying emotion driving their position. That's the label. Then you re-articulate the facts of their situation in your own words. That's the paraphrase. You are identifying, re-articulating, and emotionally affirming the world according to your counterpart.
So the student sits down with the aggressive boss, and instead of pitching his own desires, he maps out the boss's fears. He says something like, "It seems like you are under immense pressure from headquarters to cut costs. And based on what we've discussed, it seems like you feel that approving any new role right now is just going to bloat the budget and make you look fiscally irresponsible to the CEO. He labels the fear of looking bad and paraphrases the reality of the budget cuts.
And the boss, who is entirely used to his employees fighting him tooth and nail for budget, is stunned into silence. He feels completely understood. He looks at the student and says, "That's right." And in that precise moment of connection, the boss's defenses drop so dramatically that he actually begins revealing hidden motivations. Piece of information the text calls black swans, which we'll cover in part 3.
I can't wait for that.
It's great. The boss reveals he actually wants a promotion and desperately needs someone on the ground to network for him at headquarters.
The student got the job instantly, not by winning a debate, but simply by making the boss feel heard. He summarized the boss's reality with such higher resolution that the boss literally exclaimed, "That's right."
It is the ultimate manifestation of emotional intelligence in a negotiation. You are stepping entirely out of your own ego, stepping into their world, and mapping it out for them so clearly that they have no choice but to agree with your assessment.
It's Jedi mind trick territory. So, to recap segment 2 for our listeners, stop hunting for the counterfeit, yes. Stop settling for the dismissive, you're right. Build your summaries using labels and paraphrasing until you hit the psychological goldmine of, "That's right."
And once you hit that gold mine, once you have established deep rapport and suspended their disbelief, you are finally in a position to start bending their reality.
Which brings us to segment 3, bending their reality. And I want to kick this off with maximum energy because we have to kill a sacred cow right now. We have to destroy the biggest piece of absolute nonsense in the entire corporate negotiating world. The concept of compromise.
It is so deeply ingrained in our culture. Meet me halfway. Let's split the difference. Find the win-win. We treat compromise as a moral virtue.
It's garbage. And the sources use a brutal, visceral example to prove exactly why it's garbage. Imagine a kidnapping in Haiti. This is a real scenario from the book. A prominent figure's aunt is snatched from her car by a gang. The kidnappers call the family and demand a ransom of $150,000 for her safe return.
A terrifying, chaotic situation with a human life on the line.
Now, I asked the listener, what is the win-win compromise in this scenario? Do the negotiators split the difference? Do they meet the kidnappers halfway and say, hey, we can't do $150,000, but how about a fair compromise of $75,000? No, of course not.
Because meeting halfway with a kidnapper still leaves you paying an extortionate amount of money, validating their business model and funding future kidnappings.
Exactly. I want to close the loop on this Haitian kidnapping story because it shows how a master operates without compromising. The negotiator didn't say no to the full amount, and they didn't offer half. They used calibrated, open-ended questions. Every time the kidnapper demanded the money, the negotiator simply asked, "How am I supposed to do that? We don't have that kind of cash." They anchored the kidnappers low, themselves, and eventually the kidnappers dropped the price to around $4,000 just to cover their operational expenses. They got the aunt back without splitting the difference. The text gives this visceral analogy for compromise that I love. Splitting the difference is like wearing one black shoe and one brown shoe.
It makes absolutely zero logical sense.
You want to wear black shoes to the party. Your partner wants you to wear brown shoes. So to avoid an argument, you compromise and wear one black shoe and one brown shoe. Now you just look ridiculous and neither of you is happy. The win-win mindset is a trap. We don't compromise because it's the optimal strategic move. We compromise because it is easy, it is safe. It saves us from the uncomfortable, agonizing conflict of actually holding our ground.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, most people in a negotiation are driven entirely by fear. The fear of a confrontation or the desire to avoid the pain of an impasse. They are not actually driven by their goals. To be a great negotiator, you have to embrace the hard stuff. As the book says, no deal is better than a bad deal.
No deal is better than a bad deal. Tattoo that on your brain. But why do we rush into these bad compromises? Why do we put on the mismatched shoes? Almost always, it's because we are terrified of deadlines.
Deadlines are the self-inflicted bogeymen of negotiation.
Yeah.
We create this imaginary catastrophic scenario in our heads where if we don't reach a deal by Friday at 5 p.m., the universe will implode.
We take ourselves hostage. We let the clock dictate our behavior.
Exactly. And there's a pervasive myth perpetuated by a lot of old-school negotiation experts that you should absolutely hide your deadlines from your counterpart. The old logic says that if they know your deadline, they will hold out and squeeze you at the last second.
The sources dismantle this myth using the story of Herb Cohen, a famous negotiator. He goes to Japan in the 1970s for his first big international business deal. He arrives, meets his Japanese hosts, and immediately tells them, "I'm staying for 1 week. My flight leaves next Friday." He revealed his deadline.
And what did his host do with that information? They entertained him for 6.5 days. They took him on tours, hosted lavish dinners, brought him to cultural events. They talked about everything except business. Then, on the final day, in the back of a car on the way to the airport, they finally start negotiating the contract. Cohen is panicked. His flight is leaving in an hour. He's terrified of going back to his bosses empty-handed, and he caves. He makes a terrible, highly compromised deal just to get it signed before he boards the plane.
So the obvious lesson is, never reveal your deadline right. Hiding it protects you. Wrong.
Completely wrong. Cohen's mistake wasn't revealing his deadline. His mistake was letting the deadline dictate his actions. Because deadlines are arbitrary, and they cut both ways. Think about it logically. If Cohen left without a deal, his Japanese hosts also wouldn't have a deal. When time runs out for you, it runs out for them too.
The sources cite research by a professor named Don Moore at UC Berkeley that totally flips the script on this asymmetry.
Moore's research empirically proved that when you reveal your deadline, you actually reduce the risk of an impasse. It forces the other side to get real. If they know time is running out, they will speed up their real concession making. Keeping your deadline a secret just leads to stalling, posturing, and paranoia. So embrace the deadline, share it openly, but never let it force you into a bad compromise.
Okay, so we've killed the sacred cow of compromise and we've demystified deadlines. Now, I have to warn the listener about the most dangerous radioactive word in the entire English language when it comes to negotiation, the F-bomb.
The word fair.
It is a totally emotional, loaded, weaponized word. We just want what's fair. As soon as someone drops the F-bomb, our rational brains completely shut down, we feel attacked, and we start making irrational, panicked concessions just to prove to the other person that we aren't bad, greedy people.
The sources break down the 3 distinct ways the word fair is used in negotiations. And as a listener, you have to know how to spot them and how to counter them instantly. Let's run through them.
Let's do it. The first way the F-bomb is used is defensive or manipulative. This is when your counterpart is feeling backed into a corner and says, "We just want what's fair." It's a subtle, passive-aggressive accusation. It implies that you are currently treating them unfairly. It's designed to trigger your guilt and make you back down. So how do we remedy that without blowing up the room? If I argue that I am being fair, I'm basically calling them a liar.
Exactly. You can't argue it. You pause, take a deep breath, and use a calibrated question to call their bluff gracefully. You say, "Okay, I apologize. Let's stop everything right now. Please tell me how I'm treating you unfairly."
I love that. You stop the tape. You invite them to explain.
It forces them to either articulate a specific logical grievance, which you can then address rationally, or it forces them to realize they were just using the word as an emotional cudgel, and they will usually back down and apologize.
Brilliant. Okay, the second way the F-bomb is used is the nefarious approach. This is the aggressive closer. They slap a piece of paper on the table, lean back, and say, "We've given you a fair offer."
It is pure arrogance. It's designed to completely shut down the negotiation. If you try to negotiate further, you are implicitly accusing them of being unfair. The remedy here is to pivot away from emotion and focus entirely on data. You mirror them with an upward inflection. Fair? And then you ask, what data are you using to determine that this is fair? Let's look at the market comparables together. You strip the guilt out of the room and demand objective proof.
You demand the receipts. You turn an emotional attack into a math problem. And the third way?
The third way is proactive. And this is how you should use the word fair. At the very beginning of a negotiation, before any numbers are discussed, you set the stage by saying, "My primary goal today is for you to feel like you are being treated fairly at all times. So please stop me at any point if you feel I'm being unfair, and we'll address it immediately."
It's a preemptive strike. You are disarming them before they can even try to use the F-bomb against you. You are establishing yourself as an honest, transparent broker. You give them permission to speak up, which ties right back to the sanctuary of no.
It creates a powerful atmosphere of trust and collaboration right out of the gate.
Okay, we are moving into the final stretch of segment 3. We are going to teach the listener how to actively warp reality using 6 specific tactical applications of human psychology. And I want to set the table for this because the foundational theory for all of these tactics comes from a Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economist named Daniel Kahneman. He developed something called prospect theory.
A monumental shift in how we understand human decision-making.
Let me explain prospect theory for the listener because it explains why we do so many stupid things. The core tenet of Kahneman's theory is that human beings are fundamentally predictably irrational beasts. Classical economics assumed we were perfect calculators, always maximizing our utility. Kahneman proved we are highly emotional apes. Specifically, he proved that we are incredibly biased towards something called loss aversion, meaning we will take wild, irrational, dangerous risks to avert a perceived loss, but we will not take those same risks to realize an equivalent gain. The psychological pain of losing $100 is roughly twice as intense as the joy of gaining $100.
We are wired for survival, and losing resources threatens our survival.
So, how do we weaponize this irrationality? How do we use loss aversion and cognitive biases to bend reality in a negotiation? The sources give us 6 distinct tactics. Let's hit them and let's really explore why they work. Tactic number 1, anchor their emotions.
This reaches back to the accusation audit we discussed in part 1. Before you even put a number on the table, you brace them for a massive emotional loss. You say, you're going to think I'm a terrible partner. You're going to think I'm incredibly greedy. You might even want to walk out of the room. You let their imagination run completely wild with how catastrophic your offer is going to be.
Their amygdala is screaming. They are sitting there thinking, oh my God, he's going to ask for 50% of the company.
Their baseline reality has been dragged down into the gutter. So when you finally make your offer, say you ask for a 15% raise, they experience a profound sense of relief. You anchored their emotions so incredibly low that your actual demand feels like a massive victory for them.
It's pure psychological judo. You manufacture a crisis so you can save them from it. Tactic number 2, let the other guy go first, mostly.
Normally, letting the other side set the initial price anchor is dangerous. But sometimes you have absolutely no idea what the market value is. The sources tell the hilarious story of Raymond Chandler, the famous detective novelist.
Yes, I love this story. Chandler goes to Hollywood in the 1940s to write the screenplay for the classic film Double Indemnity with director Billy Wilder.
Chandler has never written a screenplay in his life. He has no idea what Hollywood writers get paid. He walks into the meeting with the studio executives totally confident and decides to strike first. He slams his fist on the table and demands a whopping astronomical salary of $150 per week.
Which, to a pulp novelist in the 1940s, sounded like insane money.
But what he didn't know was that the studio executives had been prepared to pay him hundreds, maybe even $1,000 a week. By going first when he didn't know the landscape, Chandler anchored himself to the floor. He cost himself a fortune. So the lesson is, let the other guy go first, because their reality might be so much more generous than yours, and they might just offer you more than you ever dreamed of asking for.
Tactic number 3, establish a range.
When you are finally forced to name a number, never give a single rigid figure. Use a bolstering range. Let's say you are negotiating a salary, and you want exactly $100,000. Don't go in and say, I want $100,000. Say, at top places like XYZ Corp, people in this specific role earn between $100,000 and $120,000.
So your bottom number, $100,000, is actually what you want. But by pairing it with $120,000, it changes the perception. It feels less aggressive to the counterpart. It feels like you're just providing market research, even though you are anchoring their brain exactly where you want them to land.
It softens the demand while keeping the anchor high. Tactic number 4, pivot to non-monetary terms.
Expand the pie. When the money dries up, find new currency.
Right. When you hit a wall on price, bend reality by changing the variables of the deal. What else matters besides money? Extra vacation days, better payment terms, a more prestigious title, a dedicated marketing budget, a parking spot. Often, things that cost your counterpart very little money are highly valuable to you. It changes the perceived value of the deal without changing the actual dollars flowing between you.
Tactic number 5, use odd-specific numbers. This is one of my absolute favorites because it exposes how glitchy the human brain is. Why does an offer of $37,893 work so much better than an offer of $38,000?
It's a fascinating cognitive bias. When we hear a round number like 38,000, our brain automatically interprets it as a placeholder. It feels soft, like a suggestion that was just pulled out of thin air. It practically begs to be negotiated.
Your counterpart immediately thinks, well, if they can do 38,000, they can probably round it down to 35,000.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But when you say 37,893, it feels incredibly precise. It gives the powerful illusion that you have spent hours poring over spreadsheets, calculating your exact operational costs down to the penny. It feels rigid, immovable, and calculated. Your counterpart is much less likely to push back on a highly specific number because it feels like a hard structural boundary rather than a guess.
It's so simple yet so devastatingly effective. Just don't end in a 0. And finally, tactic number 6, Surprise with a gift.
This plays on the biological, evolutionary urge for reciprocity. If negotiations are getting tense and you are far apart on price, you stake an extreme anchor, wait for them to reject it, and then instantly offer a completely unrelated surprise gift or concession.
Okay, I understand we can't do that price, but what if I throw in a year of free maintenance?
Exactly. The sudden, unexpected generosity triggers a deep psychological need in them to repay the favor. We are social creatures. We hate feeling indebted. It breaks the tension, establishes goodwill, and very often they will suddenly improve their own counteroffer just to reciprocate your kindness.
It's a total pattern interrupt. So what does this all mean? Let me connect this all back to the listener. As you are sitting there processing all of this, the anchoring, the odd numbers, the loss aversion, you might be feeling a little uneasy. You might be thinking, this feels a little manipulative. But remind yourself, these aren't manipulative magic tricks. They are rational, empathetic applications of human psychology. You are navigating the subterranean desires of the human animal. You are recognizing that people are emotional, fearful, and driven by loss. By deeply understanding that, you hold the remote control to reality. You aren't forcing anyone to do anything. You are just arranging the psychological environment so that they voluntarily choose the path you want them to take.
It is the difference between trying to break down a heavy oak door with a battering ram and simply taking the time to find the key to unlock it from the other side. One is exhausting and destructive. The other is elegant and efficient.
Elegant and efficient. I love that. Okay, let's take a breath and recap this absolute dopaminergic sprint of a session. What did we cover today? First, we killed the word yes. We exposed it as a counterfeit trap, a social pacifier, and we learned to turn no into our best friend, an oasis of safety that actually starts the real conversation. Then we trekked into the jungle with the FBI to hunt down the elusive, that's right, the subtle epiphany that proves you've mapped out your counterpart's world perfectly using labels and paraphrasing. And finally, we destroyed the illusion of compromise, stared down the bogeyman of deadlines, and learned how to warp reality with extreme anchors, odd numbers, and the undeniable power of prospect theory.
It's a massive paradigm-shifting toolkit for taking control of the unseen psychological currents in any room you walk into.
And the craziest part, we're only halfway through. This was just part 2 of our mini-series. Listeners, in part 3, we are going to dive into the illusion of control. We are going to learn how to spot liars using the famous 738-55 rule, and we are going to find the rarest creature of all in any negotiation, the black swan. You will not want to miss it.
It's going to fundamentally change how you view human interaction. And as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We spend our whole lives at work, in our marriages, with our kids, trying to get people to agree with us. Yeah. We argue, we push, we use logic and charts to try and force a yes. But what if the ultimate form of influence isn't getting someone to agree with your reality, but making them feel so deeply understood that they invite you to rewrite theirs? Next time you are in an argument, don't aim for victory. Aim for, that's right, and watch the walls crumble.
Incredible. Watch the walls crumble. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Go out there, trigger some no's, hunt for that, that's right, and we will see you next time for part 3. Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, we are officially in part 3 of our 4-part mini-series on the art of high-stakes negotiation. And I have to say, the journey so far has completely changed the way I look at everyday interactions.
It really has been a massive shift.
It has, and I'm talking directly to you, the listener, right now. You've been with us through this whole evolution. I mean, in part 1, we built out the foundation of tactical empathy.
Right.
We spent a lot of time on mirroring, on labeling, on that counterintuitive idea that getting your counterpart to feel deeply understood is actually the fastest way to melt their defensive walls.
It's about disarming them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then in part 2, we took it a step further. We looked at how to literally bend their perception of reality. We got into extreme anchors.
The odd numbers.
Yes, the psychological weight of odd numbers, and how to diffuse that incredibly dangerous, explosive word. Fair.
Right. It really has been a progression from defensive to offensive strategy.
Right.
I mean, we started by learning how to survive an aggressive encounter, and then we moved into how to shape the playing field.
But today,
Right.
today we are entering a totally different arena. Because if the first 2 parts were about getting someone to sit at the table and listen to you, today is about getting them to actually do the work for you.
Which is the Holy Grail.
It is. We are diving into chapters 7 and 8 of the source material today. The mission is mastering the concepts of creating the ultimate illusion of control and, crucially, how to guarantee execution.
Because here's the harsh reality. Getting someone to say yes is absolutely meaningless.
Meaningless.
A yes without a how is basically just a polite lie.
A polite lie that hits hard. But let's do a quick vibe check on the pacing today because we are going for a dopaminergic sprint here. No slow warm-ups. We are diving straight into the deep end of psychological stealth.
I am ready for it.
I want to set a very specific mental image for you as we get into this. Just imagine walking into a hostile boardroom. Or honestly, just imagine walking into a deeply tense family argument about money or boundaries.
High stress.
Your heart is pounding, your adrenaline is spiking, your baseline instinct in that moment is to assert dominance. Right.
Of course. You want to win.
You want to throw a verbal punch. You want to lay down the law and take control. But imagine if instead of throwing that punch, you just step back.
You don't engage the aggression.
Exactly. You ask a precisely calibrated question, and you let the other person shadow box until they literally exhaust themselves and hand you the keys to the kingdom.
That is the essence of what we're talking about today. It is mental Tai Chi.
Mental Tai Chi, I love that. So whether you're negotiating a multi-million-dollar contract, trying to get a stubborn freelancer to finish a project, or you're just trying to get your kids to put on their shoes and go to bed.
The daily struggles.
The real struggles. This deep dive is going to hand you the cheat codes to human behavior. Let's jump straight into the deep end. I think the best place to start is by looking at the default state of the human brain when we enter a disagreement.
Because we do not start at a baseline of neutrality.
We don't. Not at all. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding most people have about human communication. We tend to think that when we approach someone with an idea, their mind is a blank slate.
They're just waiting to rationally evaluate our proposal.
Right. But if we look at the work of psychologist Kevin Dutton, he outlines a concept called unbelief.
Unbelief.
Unbelief isn't just passive skepticism. It isn't a lack of trust. It is active biological resistance.
Active resistance, like their brain is literally fighting you before you even finish your sentence.
Precisely.
Yeah.
When you sit down at a negotiating table, or even when you just walk up to an airline customer service desk to complain about a canceled flight, the person across from you is already in a state of active rejection.
Their guard is up.
Completely up. Their fight or flight system, what Daniel Kahneman calls System 1 thinking, is on high alert. If you come at them with demands, if you try to force them to believe your side of the story, their defensive reflexes are going to flare up.
It's biological.
It is a biological certainty. You are shoving information down their throat, and their psychological gag reflex kicks in.
So if their brain is actively rejecting my premise, what on earth am I supposed to do? Because my instinct is to just explain my position better.
With more facts.
Yeah, with more logic.
And that is the rookie mistake. What's fascinating here is that the goal in that moment is not to force the other person to believe you. You cannot overpower unbelief with logic.
Okay, so what is the goal?
The goal is simply to stop them from actively unbelieving. You just need to remove the friction. You have to create a suspension of unbelief. And the most effective counterintuitive way to do that, you ask them for help.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on that a bit. If I am in a high-stakes negotiation or I'm dealing with someone who is already being aggressive, isn't asking for help going to make me look incredibly weak?
That is the fear.
Won't they just exploit that?
It feels that way, which is why it's so hard to execute. But you have to look at what asking for help actually does to the neurology of the person you're speaking to. When you ask someone for help, you completely bypass their defensive mechanisms and you immediately trigger their ego.
Trigger their ego.
You elevate their status.
Yeah.
You are implicitly saying you have power, you have expertise, and I need it. It is almost impossible for a human being to maintain active aggressive resistance towards someone who is genuinely asking for their guidance.
It disarms the threat response.
And replaces it with a problem-solving response.
That is fascinating. You are hacking their ego to turn off their defense systems. We have this incredible visceral anecdote from the source material that illustrates this perfectly.
The hospital story.
Yes, it doesn't take place in a boardroom. It takes place in a hospital. I want you to really picture this scene. Imagine the sterile, chaotic, noisy environment of a hospital emergency ward. Fluorescent lights humming, nurses running around.
Monitors beeping everywhere.
Right. And there is a patient in one of the rooms who is absolutely furious. He is packing his bags. He has just violently ripped his own IV out of his arm.
Blood is dripping.
Blood is actually dripping, and he is threatening to storm out of the building.
It is a highly volatile, emotional situation.
Yeah.
His fight-or-flight system is completely maxed out.
Maxed out. Now, the standard response from a stressed out nurse or an arrogant doctor, that brute force I need to control this response, is to confront him.
To assert medical authority.
Right, you can't leave. You are incredibly sick. If you leave, your insurance won't cover this. You could die. Get back in that bed right now. But what happens when you do that?
You escalate the conflict. You turn it into a showdown. It becomes his bravado and independence versus your authority.
And no one wants to lose face.
Exactly. For someone to back down, they have to lose face. They have to admit defeat. When ego and face are on the line, people will fight to the bitter end, even against their own best interests.
Just to prove they are in control.
Yes.
Which is exactly what we usually see. But in this story, a senior doctor walks into the room. He sees the chaos. He sees the bleeding arm, the packed bag, the furious patient. And he doesn't bark a single order.
He doesn't assert his authority.
No. He looks at the patient, maintains a totally calm demeanor, and asks one incredibly specific question. What do you hope to accomplish by leaving?
Let's really break down the psychological impact of that single question. What do you hope to accomplish by leaving? It stops the patient dead in his tracks.
All that aggressive energy suddenly has nowhere to go.
The doctor didn't say you can't leave. If he had, the patient would have immediately yelled, "Watch me," and walked out just to prove he could.
The resistance is the point.
Yes. Instead, the doctor fully acknowledged the patient's reality, that he is currently in the process of leaving, and simply asked him to articulate the goal behind it.
He asked the patient to engage his neocortex.
The logical, higher-order thinking part of the brain. To explain his strategy, the patient is forced to pause. He has to actually think about his own behavior.
And the bravado just evaporates.
The doctor took the confrontation completely out of the equation by giving the patient the ultimate illusion of control. He made the patient feel like he was the one steering the ship.
Even though the doctor was the one setting the course.
Precisely.
It's brilliant. It's using their own momentum against them. It totally brings to mind this fantastic quote from Robert Estabrook that we found in the text. He who has learned to disagree without being disagreeable has discovered the most valuable secret of negotiation.
A powerful quote.
I want you, the listener, to really let that sink in for a second. Think about your own daily life. Think about how much raw emotional energy you waste trying to force compliance.
Arguing with your spouse about how to discipline the kids.
Or arguing with a vendor over a missed delivery deadline. You push your agenda, they push back with their excuses. It is utterly exhausting. But what if you just stopped pushing?
Become an open door instead of a brick wall.
Exactly. What if instead of being a brick wall that they have to crash into, you became an open door with a very specific guided path laid out behind it? What if you used questions as a pressure release valve?
That is the core shift in mindset.
Yeah.
But it raises an important practical question. What kind of questions actually work as a pressure release valve?
Right, because you can't just throw any random question at an angry person.
No. If you ask the wrong type of question, you can actually sound condescending and escalate the hostility. This is where we transition from the theory of suspending unbelief into the actual tactical weapon you're going to use to achieve it.
The tool of choice.
The calibrated question. It is the absolute cornerstone of creating the illusion of control.
Let's get deeply tactical here. Weaponized curiosity. Calibrated questions. These are not your average conversation starters.
No, they are highly engineered.
Highly engineered, precise queries designed to completely remove aggression from an interaction while forcing the other person to do all the heavy mental lifting. And the rules for crafting them are incredibly strict. You have to aggressively audit your own vocabulary.
You really do.
The first rule, you must entirely eliminate closed-ended verbs from your conflict vocabulary. I'm talking about words like can, is, are, do, and does.
It requires a massive linguistic shift because those words are so ingrained in how we speak. But think about the structural flaw of those words.
Yeah.
If I say to you, can you lower this price? Or is this your final offer?
Or do you have the report ready?
Right. What is the most likely and easiest response you can give me?
I can just look at you and say no.
Exactly. And the conversation is instantly over. You've hit a brick wall. Closed-ended questions are dangerous because they allow your counterpart to shut you down with absolutely zero mental effort.
They don't have to explain themselves.
They don't have to engage with your problem. They don't have to empathize with you. They just drop the word no, and you are left scrambling to restart the negotiation.
Calibrated questions, on the other hand, are strictly open-ended. They strip away the yes-no binary entirely. So to build a true calibrated question, we are borrowing from the classic reporter's toolkit: who, what, when, where, why, and how.
But the strategy actually narrows this down even further.
It does. It advises us to rely almost exclusively on just two of those words, what and how.
Yes. The other words have structural weaknesses. Words like who, when, and where often just elicit a flat factual response.
If you ask when is the project due, they say Friday.
It doesn't generate deep thought or collaboration. It just exchanges data.
Hmm.
But what and how force the counterpart to actually examine the situation and articulate a complex thought process.
Mm-hmm.
What are we trying to accomplish here? How does this timeline impact the rest of the team?
They have to build a narrative to answer you.
They do.
And then there is the word why. Oh man, the word why. The text treats this word like a loaded weapon with a hair trigger. It is the hot stove rule. You know how when you were a toddler, your parents drilled into your head not to touch the hot stove?
Yes.
That is exactly how you should treat the word why in a negotiation. Do not touch it.
It is incredible how universal this is. In almost every language and culture on Earth, the word why is perceived subconsciously as an accusation.
It really is. Think about it in a personal relationship. If your partner comes home and you say, "Why did you buy that?" Instantly what happens?
Their defensive reflexes flare up, they feel interrogated, they immediately feel the need to justify their existence and their choices.
It demands a defense.
Even if you meant it innocently, the word itself carries accusatory baggage. If you want to know the reasoning behind the purchase without triggering a fight, you transform the why into a what.
You ask what went into the decision to buy that.
It asks for the exact same information, but it removes the sting.
That is such a subtle but massive difference. What went into the decision versus why did you do it? Now, there is one very specific advanced level exception to the hot stove rule. You can touch the hot stove if and only if you specifically want to trigger defensiveness in order to make them defend a goal that actually serves your interests.
Yes, and this is a brilliant high-level nuance. You can actually weaponize that defensiveness if you know what you're doing.
Give me an example.
Let's say you are pitching a client and you are trying to win their business away from a massive competitor. You might ask, why would you ever switch your business to my boutique firm? Your current vendor is a global giant. Because the word why triggers a defense mechanism, the client might actually start defending the premise of the question. They might say, well, yes, they are huge, but they treat us like a number. We need the personalized service that a smaller firm like yours can provide.
You have literally tricked them into pitching your own competitive advantage back to you.
Exactly. But it requires absolute mastery of your tone. If you sound arrogant when you ask it, it will backfire completely. For the vast majority of your daily interactions, keep your hand entirely off the hot stove. Stick to the safety and power of what and how.
Okay, so we stick to the classics. What is the biggest challenge you face? What about this is important to you? How do you see this playing out? But out of all the possible calibrated questions, there is one that stands above the rest. The text essentially crowns it the greatest of all time. The Jew out.
It really is the ultimate tool in the arsenal.
And it is this exact phrase, how am I supposed to do that?
A masterpiece.
It is the ultimate polite no. It is a magical phrase that completely rejects an unreasonable demand without ever actually using the word no.
If we break down the mechanics of how am I supposed to do that, it is a masterpiece of behavioral hacking. When someone makes a ridiculous demand and you reply with how am I supposed to do that, you are doing several highly complex psychological things simultaneously.
Walk me through them.
First, you are implicitly asking for help, which, as we discussed, flatters their ego and sustains their unbelief. Second, you are acknowledging their power in the dynamic. But third, and most importantly, you are forcing them to look at your constraints.
You load your reality into their brain.
And you force them to use their own mental RAM to try and solve your problem.
You are forcing them to empathize with you whether they want to or not?
Precisely. You are forcing them into a state of structural empathy. They literally have to step into your shoes to formulate an answer to the question. And very often, when they mentally walk through the steps of how you can possibly meet their unreasonable demand, they realize on their own that it's impossible.
And then what?
As a result, they will actually bid against themselves and lower their own demand without you having to make a single counteroffer.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate again here, because this is where people get scared to use this. If I'm dealing with a genuine narcissist or a super aggressive boss who just loves throwing their weight around, and they tell me to finish a massive project by tomorrow morning,
Right.
if I look at them and say, how am I supposed to do that? Aren't they just going to look back at me and say, I don't care? figure it out, that's what I pay you for. How do you prevent this from completely blowing up in your face?
That is the exact fear everyone has, and it's completely valid. The phrase itself is not magic. The magic is in the delivery. It is entirely dependent on your tone.
Tone is
If
everything.
you ask, how am I supposed to do that with even a hint of defiant sarcasm or anger? It will be interpreted as a challenge. It will sound like I'm not doing that and you can't make me.
And an aggressive boss will absolutely respond with, figure it out.
To make it work, you have to use the late-night FM DJ voice. It has to be slow, calm, and deeply deferential. It has to genuinely sound like a plea for guidance. I want to deliver this for you, but how am I supposed to do that?
Ah, I see.
When delivered with deference, it is incredibly difficult for even the most aggressive person to just say, figure it out, because you've positioned them as the wise mentor who holds the answer.
It all comes back to tone. To illustrate just how powerful this can be when the stakes are high, I want to dive deep into one of my absolute favorite stories from the text. The story of the female freelance strategist.
A masterclass.
It is a masterclass in using a ladder of calibrated questions under extreme emotional pressure. So let's paint her situation. You are this freelancer. You have busted your pie set completely over a project. You did the work, you delivered it on time, the client used it, and now you are just trying to get paid your agreed-upon rate.
Seems simple enough.
But you are dealing with a new CEO who took over the client company. And this guy is a nightmare. He is a sexist, arrogant, penny-pinching executive whose entire corporate strategy is to cut costs by bullying independent vendors who don't have the legal resources to fight back.
A classic corporate bully.
Exactly. He looks at her invoice, completely dismisses the legally binding contract they signed, and offers her a fraction of what she's owed. He lowballs her aggressively.
And let's recognize the power asymmetry here. He knows she is an independent contractor. He knows she probably needs that money to pay rent.
He's banking on it.
He is banking on her either folding out of desperation or getting angry and storming off, which saves him the money anyway.
And the natural human instinct in her position is absolute rage. You want to scream, you want to threaten to burn his company down on social media, you want to tell him he's a thief and threaten a massive lawsuit. But what would happen if she did that?
If she attacked him, it would trigger his ego. He would dig his heels in. Because he had the resources, he would probably tie her up in legal fees for years just to prove a point and crush her.
She might eventually win in court, but it'd take years.
And destroy her peace of mind.
Yeah.
She would lose the war.
But she doesn't do that. She somehow manages to suppress her entirely justified rage, and she uses a scripted, meticulous ladder of calibrated questions. When he gives her the ridiculous lowball offer, she doesn't argue the validity of the contract. She looks at him and asks, how does this bill violate our agreement?
Notice the structural brilliance of that. She isn't accusing him. She isn't saying you're violating the agreement, you liar. She is calmly asking him to explain how the invoice violates it.
And of course, he can't answer that because it doesn't violate the agreement. She has forced him to try and logically justify his bullying, and he comes up empty. He gets flustered.
So what does a bully do when they get flustered? They attack. He tries to deflect the question by attacking the quality of her work, making vague complaints to justify the lower price.
So she climbs to the next rung of the ladder. She absorbs the attack, stays completely calm, and asks, are you saying I misled you?
That is a fascinating pivot. By asking, are you saying I misled you? She is forcing him to either explicitly call her a liar to her face, which requires a massive amount of interpersonal aggression that most corporate bullies actually shy away from in direct conversation, or he has to back down and admit she didn't mislead him.
Right, and he backs down. He mumbles something about miscommunication, but he still refuses to pay the full price. He's clinging to his ego. So she hits him with the ultimate weapon, the Jewett.
Here it comes.
She looks at his lowball offer. She pauses to let the silence do the work. And delivered with total deference, she asks, how am I supposed to accept that?
She literally takes her problem, the fact that the offer is insultingly low, and hands it to him to solve. She makes him negotiate against himself.
And what happens? He has to sit there and think about it. He realizes he has absolutely no logical ground to stand on. He can't explain how she is supposed to accept an offer that violates a signed contract for completed work without sounding like an absolute cartoon villain.
So he folds.
He folds. He paid her every single cent she was owed. And she did it without blowing up the relationship, without screaming, and without getting dragged into a multi-year legal battle. She let him shadowbox until he knocked himself out.
It is a beautiful execution of the strategy.
Yeah.
But, and this is perhaps the most important caveat of this entire discussion, this entire strategy, this beautiful ladder of calibrated questions falls apart instantly without one deeply visceral requirement.
Emotional regulation.
Emotional regulation.
Yeah.
You have to bite your tongue. This is the bedrock of the entire system. If you cannot control your own emotional reactions, none of these tactics will work.
It's so true. When that CEO lowballed the freelancer, her amygdala was screaming at her to attack. If she had snapped and asked, how am I supposed to accept that with a tone of furious, dripping sarcasm, how would he have reacted?
He would have heard the aggression, not the question. It would have been interpreted as an attack, and his defensive reflexes would have slammed shut.
The illusion of control relies entirely on your counterpart believing that they are the ones in charge of the conversation.
If your tone betrays your anger or your impatience, the illusion shatters. You have to train your neocortex to override your animal instincts. You have to take a physical breath, literally bite your tongue if you have to, and let the hot passion of the moment dissipate before you open your mouth.
If you can't control your own reactions, you have absolutely zero hope of hacking someone else's. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? It means the next time someone sends you a completely unreasonable, furious email, or your kid flat out refuses to eat their dinner and throws a tantrum, your first job is to do nothing.
Do not react.
Pause, bite your tongue, and formulate a what or a how question. Shift the cognitive burden of solving the problem onto them. But getting them to calm down and agree to a solution is really only half the battle. And this is where we need to execute a hard pivot into the concepts covered in Chapter 8.
The execution phase.
Yes, because the adrenaline rush of getting someone to finally say yes is intoxicating, but it is also incredibly dangerous. Why? Because as we touched on earlier, yes is nothing without how.
It is the ultimate mirage. Think about how many times in your career or your personal life you've reached an agreement with someone. You've shaken hands, you've felt that massive surge of victory and relief, only to have the entire deal slowly disintegrate over the next month because the logistics weren't ironed out.
It just fades away.
Poor implementation is the silent killer of success. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it destroys relationships, it ruins projects, and it drains your energy. And very often it happens because the yes you celebrated was what we call a counterfeit yes.
The counterfeit yes.
If a counterpart says yes just to make you go away because they're tired of arguing, or if they say yes but secretly feel like they were bullied or cornered into the agreement, they are not going to follow through.
They will actively or passively sabotage the execution.
They will forget deadlines. They will misunderstand instructions. You cannot just celebrate the moment of agreement. You have to meticulously architect the implementation. You have to use how questions to make them articulate the execution in their own words so deeply and thoroughly that they become convinced the entire logistical plan was their idea to begin with.
To really drive home the stakes of this, to text gives us a scenario where the consequences of poor implementation weren't just a lost contract, they were literally life and death.
The prison siege.
It's an incredibly tense cinematic scene. Picture this, the St. Martin Parish Prison in Louisiana. It is a full-blown maximum security siege. A group of highly agitated, totally disorganized inmates have rioted and taken the warden and several staff members hostage.
Terrifying situation.
They are armed with makeshift shanks and knives. The tension in the air is suffocating. Now the FBI negotiators get on the radio. They use everything we've talked about. They use tactical empathy. They use calibrated questions. They slowly lower the temperature. And eventually, incredibly, the inmates agree to surrender.
They say yes.
They say yes. They say, okay, we will let the hostages go and we will walk out. Huge victory, right? The negotiators should break out the champagne.
Absolutely not. In fact, that is the most dangerous moment of the entire standoff. Because in a situation that volatile a yes is a tightrope over a canyon, you have to look at the reality of the scene. These inmates are terrified. They are paranoid. Their adrenaline is through the roof, and they are clutching weapons.
And outside
the doors, you have SWAT teams with assault rifles dialed in on every exit. If the inmates just opened the doors and walked out into that courtyard unannounced, what do you think would happen?
Chaos.
Yeah.
Pure chaos. Someone trips, someone makes a sudden movement, a SWAT sniper gets spooked, a gun goes off, and suddenly you have a bloodbath.
The agreement to surrender meant absolutely nothing if the how wasn't orchestrated perfectly. The negotiators could not just accept the yes, they had to ask a grueling series of meticulous how questions to design the surrender.
Give me some examples.
How are you going to open the door? Who is walking out first? How are you going to hold your hands? What exactly are you going to do with the weapons before you step outside?
They are forcing the inmates to build the choreography of their own surrender.
Precisely. They had to make the inmates visualize the exact step-by-step sequence of events, articulate it out loud, and own the process. By explaining the how the inmates were mentally rehearsing a peaceful outcome.
The implementation had to be flawless.
And it had to come from the inmates' own mouths, or the yes would have resulted in a massacre.
That is heavy. But it perfectly illustrates why the how is the only thing that matters. And that leads us to what is arguably the most wild, intense story in this entire deep dive, the Ecuador jungle escapade.
Oh, this is an incredible case study.
This is where the concept of using how questions reaches its absolute zenith. It's like something out of a movie. Here is the setup. An American named Jose is working in the deep jungles of Ecuador. He is kidnapped by a ruthless, heavily armed group of Colombian rebels.
Not an amateur operation.
No. They stash him in a remote camp and they contact his wife Julie back in the States. They are not interested in political demands. They want cash. They demand $5 million. Or Jose dies.
It is the ultimate high-stakes nightmare for a family.
Unimaginable. Now, Julie is not a trained hostage negotiator. She's a terrified wife sitting in her house. But the experts come in, they coach her, and they hand her the ultimate weapon. When the rebel commander gets on the satellite phone and demands $5 million, Julie does not say no.
She doesn't say we don't have it.
She doesn't say, "Are you crazy?" Because saying no is a direct rejection, and rejection triggers violence. Instead, she asks a calibrated how question. She says, "How can we raise that much?"
How can we raise that much? It is the perfect gentle denial. It acknowledges their demand, but shifts the logistical impossibility right back onto them. And what is truly fascinating here is the psychological warfare she is unleashing on these kidnappers without them even realizing it. She is forcing them into a state of profound cognitive dissonance.
Explain that. What is happening in the kidnapper's brain when she asks that?
Think about the script the kidnapper is operating from. He is holding an assault rifle in a jungle camp, making demands on a satellite phone. He is expecting resistance. He is expecting her to cry, to beg, to offer a smaller amount of money, or to yell at him. His brain is prepared for a fight.
Right.
But instead, this woman, thousands of miles away, is calmly asking him to solve her domestic fundraising problems. She is asking for his financial advice. She exhausts their brain power. Remember, these are guerrilla fighters. They are tacticians of violence, not financial planners.
Right. They don't know how to liquidate a 401k.
Exactly. When she keeps hitting them with variations of, how am I supposed to get that money? How do I know he's okay? How are we going to physically transfer this cash? She is creating massive cognitive friction. She is making them bid against themselves.
She is effectively making them negotiate with their own demands. It is absolute brilliance. They would demand the $5 million. She would say, "How am I supposed to do that?" And because they literally couldn't answer the question of how an average American family liquidates $5 million, they would just drop the price.
It's just like that.
They went from $5 million down to $3 million, down to a few $100,000 just because they couldn't figure out the logistics to answer her calibrated questions. But the story gets even better. Because Julie was so relentless with her how questions, she created a logistical nightmare for the rebels' chain of command.
Yes, the bureaucratic red tape. This is the most incredible part.
The negotiator for the kidnappers didn't know the answers to her questions. He didn't have the authority to lower the price or change the transfer method on his own, so every single time she asked a difficult how question, he had to hang up the satellite phone.
He had to physically hike deep back into the jungle.
Gather the entire rebel leadership council and hold these endless, frustrating internal committee meetings just to figure out how to answer this American housewife. She literally bogged down a terrorist organization in administrative paperwork.
And that administrative distraction is exactly what saved Jose's life. Because the rebel leadership was so consumed with trying to outsmart Julie's logistical questions, they became internally frustrated. They were arguing amongst themselves. They lost focus on their prisoner.
The guard dropped.
And in the midst of that distraction, their guard dropped. Jose found an opening, slipped out of a window, and literally escaped into the dense Ecuadorian jungle. He survived and walked to freedom because his wife asked how until the enemy's brain effectively broke.
Wow.
That is the sheer power of making your counterpart articulate the implementation. Exhaust their resources, you force them to see the reality of your constraints, and you make them take ownership of the very obstacles they're trying to force upon you.
It's an unbelievable testament to staying calm under pressure. But I want to zero in on a phrase you used a minute ago, the Rebel Leadership Council. Because that concept transitions us into one of the most critical yet overlooked aspects of any negotiation. It exposes a massive blind spot that almost everyone listening to this right now has.
The invisible players.
Yes. When we are negotiating, whether it's buying a car, pitching a new client, or trying to get a raise from our boss, We tend to focus 100% of our energy and attention on the person sitting directly across the table from us. We look them in the eye, we read their body language, we mirror their words. But here's the terrifying truth. Almost no one flies solo. There is always a committee lurking behind the table.
Always. We call these the level 2 players. And they're the invisible assassins of your deals.
The invisible assassins. Explain who these people are in a normal corporate or family setting.
They are the people who have influence over the outcome, but are never present for the actual negotiation. It could be a skeptical spouse who reviews the finances at home. It could be a micromanaging CEO who has to approve the VP's budget. It could be the legal department, the compliance officer, or the IT guys who actually have to install the software you're selling. The text explicitly warns us that deal killers are often more important than deal makers.
Why are they so dangerous?
Because you can spend weeks building incredible rapport with the person across the table. You can use tactical empathy. You can bend their reality. You can get them to a solid, enthusiastic yes. But if you don't secure the buy-in of the level 2 players, the people who actually have to implement the deal, they will quietly, efficiently murder your agreement in its sleep.
They just kill it.
They won't openly declare war. They will just drag their feet. They will find endless technical loopholes. They will simply look at their boss and say, it's too hard to integrate this. And your glorious yes turns into a miserable, drawn-out failure.
So how on earth do you fight an assassin you can't even see? How do you flush them out without sounding paranoid and asking who else is secretly pulling the strings here?
You flesh them out using, you guessed it, calibrated questions. But these questions are specifically designed to map the internal landscape of their organization. You have to actively hunt for the level 2 players. You ask things like, how does this new initiative affect the rest of your team? Or how on board are the people not on this call?
Or what do your colleagues in IT see as their main challenges in implementing a system like this?
Exactly. You are essentially prompting the person across the table to act as your scout, revealing the internal politics and potential roadblocks of their own organization.
And if you fail to ask those questions, you pay a massive price. There is this really painful anecdote about a corporate training deal in Florida that illustrates this perfectly. Let me lay it out. The negotiators had spent months on the phone with the CEO and the head of HR of a massive company. The rapport was fantastic. The executives were 100% gung-ho on bringing in this comprehensive training program.
It seemed like a slam dunk.
A total slam dunk. It was a highly lucrative deal. The contracts were basically ready to be signed, but then the deal stalled. For over a year, it went absolutely nowhere. Endless delays, unreturned emails, mysterious scheduling conflicts.
It is the classic slow death of a deal.
Yeah.
And why did it happen? Because the negotiators completely failed to uncover the hidden level 2 player. They were so focused on the CEO that they didn't realize there was a rogue division head within the company.
A rogue VP.
This division head didn't particularly like the CEO, didn't want the training for his team, and held enough internal political power to completely block the implementation of the program.
And the crazy part is the CEO and the HR head couldn't force him to comply. But they were too embarrassed by their own lack of internal control to admit that to the negotiators. They didn't want to say, hey, we can't actually control our own VP. So instead of telling the truth, they just stonewalled.
They ghosted them.
The entire multi-million-dollar deal was paralyzed by one invisible assassin entirely because the negotiators never bothered to ask who else needs to be on board to make this happen across all divisions.
It is a painful lesson in organizational dynamics. You have to map the entire negotiating space, not just the real estate across the table. You have to anticipate the objections of the people who aren't in the room.
But that brings up a really thorny issue. What happens when the person across the table or the invisible assassin pulling their strings is just flat out lying to you? How do you know if the yes they are giving you is real or if they are just blowing smoke to get you off the phone because they know the deal is dead?
That is the ultimate question.
That brings us to the final and arguably most intense part of our deep dive today, lie detection and human hacking. How do you spot a glitch in the matrix? How do you know when you are being played?
To understand deception, we have to look at the mechanical breakdown of human communication. We get introduced to a fascinating piece of research known as the 738-55 rule, which was developed by UCLA psychology professor Albert Mehrabian. This rule quantifies exactly how we convey meaning, specifically when we are communicating emotions, attitudes, or intent.
Okay.
According to Mehrabian's research, only 7% of a message is communicated through the actual literal words we use.
Wait, 7%? That seems impossibly low. We spend so much time obsessing over exactly what words to say.
It is low, but it's accurate when it comes to emotional truth. 38% of the message is conveyed through the tone of voice, the pitch, the cadence, the inflection, the speed. And a staggering 55% of the message is transmitted purely through body language and facial expressions.
That is wild. That means 93% of human communication is entirely nonverbal. It is the music and the dance, not the lyrics. So if I say to you, sure, I'd love to help you move couches this weekend, but my shoulders are slumped, my voice is totally flat, and I'm avoiding eye contact while I say it, the 93% of my nonverbal communication is screaming, I would literally rather eat glass than help you move.
Exactly. And when the tone and the body language do not match the words being spoken, the matrix is glitching. That incongruence is your early warning system for deception or hidden resistance. It means the person is either actively lying to you or they are deeply uncomfortable with the agreement they are making and will almost certainly sabotage the execution later.
So when you spot that glitch, what do? You can't just call him a liar.
No, calling them a liar triggers the ego and shuts down the conversation. When you spot the incongruence, you have to gently probe it using a label. You address the 93%, not the 7%. I heard you say yes, but it seemed like there was hesitation in your voice. Or you said, you are on board with the timeline, but it feels like something about those dates is making you uncomfortable.
You bring the nonverbal into the verbal space.
By labeling the mismatch, you invite them to reveal the hidden truth or the hidden obstacle without ever accusing them of deception.
It makes them feel seen rather than attacked. But there's another, even more systematic way to stress test a yes to see if it holds weight. It's called the rule of three. I love this concept because it's so incredibly practical. The fundamental premise here is that it is cognitively exhausting for a human being to convincingly lie or to fake conviction 3 times in a row in a single conversation.
It taxes the brain too much to maintain the facade from multiple angles.
Right. So the rule of three acts as your polygraph test. It's how you sort the real solid agreements from the counterfeit garbage. Because as we've learned, there were 3 distinct kinds of yes. There is the commitment yes, which is the real deal. They're actually going to do the thing. There is the confirmation yes, which is just a reflex like saying yes when someone asks, is the sky blue? It just confirms a fact.
And then there's the counterfeit, yeah.
The counterfeit yes is the polite lie. It's the yes, I'll review your proposal when they have already decided to throw it in the trash the moment you leave. It is designed solely to make you go away and release the social pressure. So to ensure you have a commitment, yes, you have to engineer the conversation to get them to agree 3 times. Break down the sequence for us.
Sequence is designed to come at the agreement from different cognitive angles. The first time is simply the initial agreement. You ask for the deal, and they say, yes, we will proceed with the contract. That is number 1. Now, you don't just ask them the exact same question again. That would be annoying and obvious.
Right.
For the second agreement, you pivot. You use a summary. You meticulously summarize their position, their fears, their constraints, and the exact terms of the deal so thoroughly that they are forced to look at you and say, that's right.
And as we learned in part 2, that's right is the magic phrase of tactical empathy.
Exactly. That's right, is your second confirmation. It proves they feel deeply understood and that they are mentally engaged with the reality of the deal, not just brushing you off. Finally, for the third agreement, you pivot one more time to a calibrated question focused entirely on implementation.
It's like asking, how will we know we're on track next week?
Or what do we do if we hit a roadblock with your legal department during the rollout? If they can answer that how question with specific actionable details, you have your third confirmation. You have a commitment, yes. If they hesitate, say, I'll try, or give vague, evasive answers, your initial yes was counterfeit, and you need to go back to the drawing board.
I love how systematic that is. It completely takes the guesswork out of evaluating an agreement. But sometimes people are actively, maliciously trying to deceive you. They aren't just giving you a polite counterfeit yes to avoid awkwardness. They are spinning a complex web of lies to cover up a mistake or hide their true intentions. And for that, we turn to the research of Harvard professor Deepak Malhotra and what the text delightfully calls the Pinocchio effect.
The Pinocchio effect is brilliant.
We all know the children's story of Pinocchio. When he lies, his wooden nose grows. Well, in the real world of adult human behavior, liars don't grow long noses. They grow long sentences.
The Pinocchio effect is a fascinating behavioral quirk rooted in the psychology of guilt and overcompensation. When someone is actively lying, they are subconsciously terrified of not being believed. To compensate for the lack of truth, they work way too hard to build a facade of credibility.
They try too hard.
The tells of a liar are rooted in this linguistic overcompensation. First, they use significantly more words than a truth teller. A truth teller will give you a concise, direct answer because the truth doesn't need dressing up. A liar will weave a complex, meandering narrative to try and baffle you with unnecessary details.
It's the classic dog ate my homework, but with an incredibly detailed backstory about the dog's dietary history.
Precisely. Second, they tend to use overly complex sentence structures, again, trying to sound authoritative and overwhelm your critical thinking with grammatical density. And third, and perhaps most tellingly from a psychological standpoint, they drastically overuse third-person pronouns. They use words like him, her, it, one, and they, while noticeably avoiding the first-person pronoun
Why
I,
do they avoid saying I?
because subconsciously they are trying to distance their own personal identity from the lie they are actively telling. It is a psychological defense mechanism against the guilt of deception.
It's like they are verbally backing away from the crime scene while they are describing it. So if you ask your vendor why the crucial shipment is late, and instead of just saying, I messed up the scheduling, they say, well, the logistics network encountered a systemic failure when they attempted to route the cargo through the secondary hub. Ding, 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 ding. The Pinocchio nose is growing. You are dealing with a liar who is hiding behind complex structures and third-person pronouns.
You've spotted the glitch.
Okay, we have covered some incredibly heavy, stealthy, almost weaponized tactics today. We've talked about hacking unbelief, using calibrated questions to exhaust people, fleshing out invisible assassins, and systematically spotting liars. It can almost feel a bit Machiavellian. But I want to end this deep dive on a deeply human note. Because amidst all of this behavioral psychology and linguistic hacking, the single most powerful tool you have in any negotiation is your own humanity. And that brings us to the concept of the Chris discount.
The quiz discount is a beautiful grounding example of how vulnerability and personalization can instantly disarm hostility. It utilizes a concept called forced empathy.
Forced empathy.
Throughout this discussion, we've talked a lot about how to get the other side to empathize with your logistical constraints using how questions. But you can also force empathy on a purely emotional level, simply by humanizing yourself, by actively reminding the person across the table that you are not a faceless problem to be solved or an obstacle to be destroyed, but a flesh and blood human being. And the easiest, most immediate way to trigger that realization is by using your own name.
Let me paint this final scene for you because it's such a perfect encapsulation of everything we've talked about. It's a crowded, noisy bar in Kansas. It is packed shoulder to shoulder, loud music, elbows everywhere. The author is there grabbing a drink with a bunch of fellow FBI hostage negotiators. He spots a single empty chair at a table nearby. He walks over to grab it so his group can sit down. But just as his hand reaches out for the chair, the guy sitting next to it glares up at him, physically squares off, and snarls, don't even think about it.
It is a classic, highly aggressive territorial dispute.
Right. The guy is marking his territory. He's puffing his chest out. Now think about the standard reactions to this. The normal reaction is either to argue back, hey buddy, the chair is empty, I'm taking it, which instantly escalates into a bar fight. Or the alternative is to just put your hands up, retreat in defeat, and walk away feeling humiliated.
Fight or flight.
But the author, being a master negotiator, doesn't do either. He doesn't argue and he doesn't run. He looks down at the angry guy, smiles a genuine smile, and simply says, hi, I'm Chris.
And the result is almost magical. The hostility completely shatters.
Yeah.
The angry guy is totally disarmed. Why? Because he was psychologically prepared to fight a nameless, faceless stranger who was trying to steal his territory. He had dehumanized the threat. He was not prepared to fight a guy named Chris who just politely introduced himself.
He changed the rules of engagement.
By introducing his own name, Chris transformed the interaction from a primal territorial dispute into a civilized social encounter. The guy's fight-or-flight response was instantly overridden by deeply ingrained social programming. He pauses, his entire physical demeanor softens, and he actually ends up offering the chair to Chris. That is the Chris discount.
It's forced empathy through sheer humanity. And the application for the listener is so clear. When you are on the phone with a miserable, overworked customer service rep who is just reading from a script and telling you no, or when you are dealing with a hostile vendor who views you as just another annoying account, don't be an account number.
Don't be a generic complaint.
Introduce yourself. Say, hi, my name is Chris, and I'm having a really tough day trying to figure this out. Humanize yourself. Be a person, not a problem. Because people are neurologically wired to help other people. They are only wired to fight abstractions.
Be a person, not a problem. That is the ultimate takeaway.
What an incredible mic drop to end this section on. Okay, let's take a deep breath and look at the massive amount of ground we have covered today in part 3 of our mini-series. We have completely evolved our strategy. We've transitioned away from the exhausting brute force arguing of the past, the old push and shove of logic, and we've stepped into the realm of mental tai chi.
You covered a lot of ground.
We've learned how to suspend the active resistance of unbelief simply by asking for help. We've learned to use the sniper rifle precision of how and what questions to give our counterparts the illusion of control, forcing them to use their own mental energy to solve our problems. We've learned that a yes is a dangerous mirage without the concrete how of execution.
And the rule of three.
Right. We've learned how to stress test those agreements with the rule of three. We've learned how to hunt down the invisible assassins lurking behind the table. And we've learned how to spot the nonverbal glitches in the matrix and listen for the long sentences of the Pinocchio effect.
It is a dense toolkit. But I want to remind you, the listener, that this isn't just academic theory to passively absorb. Knowledge is only valuable when it is understood and applied. These are practical tools designed for the messy reality of the real world.
Tomorrow morning.
Yes, tomorrow morning at work when your boss makes an impossible last-minute demand. Or tomorrow night at home when your teenager refuses to follow the rules and tries to pick a fight. Do not throw a verbal punch. Do not just say no. Pause. Take a physical breath. Regulate your own emotions. Suppress your instincts. And simply ask with genuine deference, how am I supposed to do that? Watch the defensive walls crumble. Watch their brains struggle to process your constraints. Watch the dynamic completely shift.
Absolutely, watch the magic happen. Before we sign off today, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to chew on as you go about the rest of your week. I want you to think back to the last 3 times someone quickly and easily said yes to you. Maybe it was a colleague agreeing to a project deadline, or a contractor promising to finish a job, or even a friend agreeing to a favor.
Think about those moments.
Knowing what you know now about the grueling rule of 3, about the linguistic tells of the Pinocchio effect, and about the massive difference between a commitment yes and a counterfeit yes. How many of those agreements you accepted were actually just polite lies designed entirely to make you go away and relieve the pressure of the conversation? And more importantly, what is it costing you in your life and your career to not know the difference?
A very powerful question to sit with.
Let that sink in. Thank you so much for joining us in the Matrix today and exploring these incredible psychological depths. Next time in the final installment, part 4 of our mini-series, we are going to venture into the deepest, darkest waters yet. We are going to uncover the hidden black swans of negotiation, the unknown unknowns that can change the entire landscape of a deal in an instant. You are not going to want to miss it. Until then, keep asking how, keep biting your tongue, and keep diving deep. Okay, let's unpack this for the last time.
Here we go.
You are standing at the absolute summit right now. I mean, we have spent hours in this mini-series layering the foundation.
Building the fortress.
Exactly, building the psychological fortress.
Right.
We mapped out tactical empathy. We did the mirroring deep dive. We disarmed the bombs in the brain with labeling. And all of that was basically the training montage.
Right, was the setup.
Yeah, but right now we are throwing out the old rule books. Today we are stepping into the ring for the bare-knuckle clash. The vibe for this grand finale is just high octane.
It is visceral.
It is entirely visceral. The mission today is to hand you the absolute most lethal field-tested tools from Chris Voss and Tal Raz's Never Split the Difference. We are walking straight into the brutal, sweaty reality of the haggling phase.
Which is where everyone falls apart.
Right, where the heart rate spikes. We are going to hunt for those impossible-to-predict black swans, and we are going to meticulously construct a system so that when the pressure hits, 120 beats per minute, you never fall back on your worst knee-jerk instincts.
Because we are moving entirely out of the realm of theory now. I mean, everything we covered up to this point, the late-night FM DJ voice, the elegant active listening, all of that was about establishing connection and gathering intelligence.
The soft skills.
Yeah, exactly, the soft skills. But at a certain point, no matter how phenomenal your rapport is, a negotiation comes down to brass tacks. It comes down to the actual split. And this is the exact moment that induces a literal cold sweat in the vast majority of human beings.
Oh yeah, the stomach drop.
You know the feeling. You are sitting across the table, the pleasantries are over, and money or terms or vital resources are on the line.
Yeah.
You either uncover the hidden truth that unlocks the deal, or you walk away with nothing. The stakes are absolute, and the environment is just entirely unforgiving if you misread the person sitting across from you.
That cold sweat is so universal, though, and Chapter 9 of the book dives straight into this. It's titled Bargain Hard. Voss points out that haggling is inevitable. It doesn't matter if you are buying a car or negotiating a multi-million-dollar merger or honestly just trying to get your kid to go to sleep.
It's all a haggle.
It's all a haggle, and most of us absolutely despise the friction. To survive this phase, Voss argues that we have to drop a rule that has been drilled into our heads since kindergarten. We had to completely abandon the golden rule.
Which sounds crazy at first.
Right. You cannot treat others how you want to be treated. Instead, you have to adopt what he calls the black swan rule. You must treat others how they need to be treated. Because walking into a negotiation assuming the other person operates with your exact psychological software is like stepping into a boxing ring blindfolded.
You cannot possibly win if you don't know the fighting style of your opponent. And what's fascinating here is the sheer volume of deals that fall apart simply because of psychological projection.
We just project ourselves onto them.
Constantly. We assume that the person across the table processes the relationship and processes silence exactly the way we do. But behavioral psychology and decades of MPI negotiation data show that human beings generally fall into three broad, highly predictable archetypes when they are placed under the pressure of the bargaining table.
The three avatars.
The three avatars, exactly. Voss and his team categorize them as the accommodator, the assertive, and the analyst. And if you are communicating with one of these avatars using the language of another, you are essentially speaking a foreign dialect. You are creating this invisible friction without even realizing it.
I really want to break these avatars down in high definition because visualizing this is incredibly powerful for the listener. So let's start with the accommodator.
Okay? The relationship builder.
Right. For an accommodator, the fundamental currency of the negotiation is the relationship itself. Time spent building rapport is time well spent. They are deeply invested in the win-win dynamic. They want to be liked, and they want to like you.
They are perfectly happy to sit in a conference room for 3 hours just chatting.
Just shooting the breeze, yeah. Because to them, a free-flowing, friendly conversation is the very definition of a successful interaction. But reading the book, there is a massive hidden danger with an accommodator. If they suddenly go silent, it doesn't mean they are pondering your brilliant offer.
It means they are angry.
Yes, it means they are mad. But why is silence their specific weapon of choice?
It really comes down to their core drive, which is conflict avoidance. Because the relationship is paramount to them, an accommodator views direct confrontation as a catastrophic threat to the harmony of the room. They will not bang their fist on the table. They will simply withdraw.
They just pull back.
Exactly. But the more dangerous consequence of this conflict avoidance is their tendency to offer a counterfeit yes. An accommodator is highly prone to agreeing to a term they know they cannot fulfill simply to alleviate the tension in the room.
Wow, so they just say yes to make the awkwardness stop.
Precisely. They will smile, they will shake your hand and agree to your timeline just to keep the rapport intact with absolutely no ability to actually deliver on it. Therefore, when dealing with an accommodator, taking their verbal agreement at face value is a critical error.
You have to anchor them.
You must gently but relentlessly push them into the mechanics of the deal. You have to use those calibrated questions we talked about earlier, like, how are we going to implement this next week?
You force their brain to move out of the emotional rapport zone and into the logistical execution zone.
Right, because if you don't anchor them to how they will just float away on the good vibes and leave you with a completely broken contract.
That is such a vivid picture. The smiling saboteur who doesn't even mean to sabotage you. Okay, let's pivot to the polar opposite, the assertive type. For an assertive negotiator, time is money, period.
The clock is always ticking.
Always ticking. They are driven by efficiency, by getting things done, and by winning. They have this burning, almost physical need to be heard and respected. And unlike the accommodator, silence for an assertive is not a sign of anger.
No silence simply means it is their turn to speak.
They want to hold the floor. And Voss shares this phenomenal story from his own life to illustrate this, acknowledging that he himself is a classic assertive. He tells this story about being out on his boat with one of his employees, this guy named Keenan.
I love this story.
So good. So Voss is giving Keenan what is supposed to be a performance review. So Voss is holding court, explaining his grand philosophy, saying things like, "We are really trying to uncover the riptide here." And Keenan just looks at him and replies, "Uncovering riptide."
The classic mirror.
Right, the mirror. And Voss nods, feeling great, and says, "Exactly, because we want to get somewhere much more productive." And Keenan replies, "Somewhat more productive.
It's brilliant.
This goes on for 45 minutes. Voss is feeling like the greatest mentor on earth. He thinks he is dispensing massive wisdom and that Keenan is totally locked in. But then Voss's son Brandon, who is sitting right there on the boat, starts laughing. He looks at his dad and says, "You don't see it, do you? Keenan is just mirroring you. He's been doing it for an hour."
It perfectly exposes the vulnerability of the assertive archetype. Because Voss isn't assertive, his primary psychological need in that moment was to be heard and validated. Keenan recognized the fighting style. He didn't argue. He didn't offer his own opinions. He simply deployed the mirror, repeating the last 1 to 3 words of Voss's sentences with that upward, inquisitive inflection.
And it worked like a charm.
Because the assertive style craves that validation and the space to speak, so Voss's brain just flooded with positive neurochemicals. He felt completely satisfied, completely understood, and completely in charge without realizing that his employee was the one actually steering the entire interaction.
The employee was totally in the driver's seat.
The takeaway here is profound. If an assertive feels truly heard, their aggressive posture softens. They will actually start negotiating with themselves and making concessions simply because you gave them the stage.
It is wild that the master FBI negotiator got played by his own technique on a boat. So we have the accommodator who needs the relationship. We have the assertive who needs to be heard. That leaves the third avatar, the analyst.
The data aggregators.
Right. For the analyst, time is preparation. They are methodical. They are meticulous. They despise surprises more than anything else on the planet. An analyst will spend 2 weeks digging through spreadsheets to find a single data point that they could have just asked for in a 5-minute phone call.
Entirely to avoid the feeling of being blindsided in a meeting.
Yes. And for an analyst, silence is not anger, and it is not an invitation to speak. Silence is their processing space. They need the quiet to calculate. Furthermore, they view reciprocity as a strict, unbending law.
It's a mathematical equation for them. If they give an inch, they expect an exact inch in return. If they don't get it, they don't get angry. They just disengage. They lock the vault.
And if we look at the dynamics between these different avatars, we can immediately see where negotiations violently derail. Picture an assertive sitting across from an analyst.
Oh, that is a recipe for disaster.
It really is. The assertive believes time is money, the clock is ticking, and we need to hash this out right now. The analyst believes time is preparation, and they need to take the new proposal back to their desk to run the numbers.
So as the analyst goes silent to process the error, the assertive interprets that silence as a challenge or an opportunity to speak more. So the assertive gets louder, starts throwing out more offers, pushing harder.
And the analyst, feeling rushed, bombarded with surprises and disrespected, completely shuts down. The deal breaks down entirely, not because the numbers didn't work, but because the psychological frameworks were utterly incompatible.
They were speaking 2 different languages.
Exactly. So I want you to think about this as you are listening. Think about your last few arguments or negotiations. Which of these 3 default settings do you naturally fall into?
Are you the relationship-driven accommodator who avoids conflict?
Or are you the time is money assertive who needs to be heard?
Or are you the data-obsessed analyst who needs a spreadsheet and silence?
Identifying your own default is step 1. Because once you step into the bargaining ring, your default setting is going to be tested. You are going to get hit. Which brings us to the concept of taking a punch and the Ackerman cheat code.
This is where it gets highly tactical.
Let's talk about the academic view of negotiation first. If you sit in a graduate-level business class, the professors love to draw diagrams of something called the ZOPA, the Zone of Possible Agreement.
It is a very clean, rational mathematical concept.
Very clean. The idea is that if I want to sell a piece of equipment for no less than $50,000 and you want to buy it for no more than $60,000, our ZOPA is that $10,000 window in between. We logically discuss the market value and find a fair point in the middle.
But Voss argues that the real world does not operate on clean math.
No. The real world features extreme anchors. People will walk into the room and hit you with a ridiculous, borderline offensive offer right out of the gate purely to shock your psychological system. It brings to mind the famous Mike Tyson quote, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth."
And the somatic experience of that punch is very real. When a counterpart drops an extreme lowball anchor, it is not just a mathematical disagreement. Your body literally reacts.
Your amygdala lights up.
The alarm bell of the brain, yes. Your heart rate spikes. The blood rushes to your cheeks. The fight or flight response is fully activated. In that state of physiological arousal, the natural human tendency is to do one of 2 things.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. You either react with anger and blow up the relationship fighting back, or even worse. Your desire to escape the uncomfortable tension is so strong that you immediately bid against yourself. You instantly drop your price or jump to your absolute maximum limit just to make the awkwardness stop.
You just flee the tension by giving up.
Surviving the bargaining ring requires mastering the tactical execution of taking that punch without flinching.
So how do we actually do that? When they swing an absurd number at your head, how do you take the punch? Voss describes it as psychological judo. When the extreme anchor comes, you do not block the punch with your face. You do not get angry, and you don't counter with your own number immediately. You deflect the momentum.
You step out of the way of the strike.
Right. One way is to pivot completely to non-monetary terms. You absorb the number and say, let's put the specific price to the side for a second. If we were to move forward, what else would make this a robust partnership? You sidestep the anger entirely.
But the other method, the more surgical strike, is to hit them with a calibrated question. You maintain a perfectly calm, late-night FM DJ voice. You look them in the eye and you ask, how am I supposed to accept that?
Let's pause on that, because if we break down the architecture of that specific question, how am I supposed to accept that? It is arguably the most powerful phrase in this entire methodology.
It accomplishes several complex psychological tasks simultaneously. First, it absorbs the energy of their extreme anchor without you making a single concession. You have not said the word no, which would trigger their defense mechanisms and cause friction, but you have also firmly rejected their premise. You haven't moved your number.
You just put a wall up without being aggressive.
Second, and more importantly, it turns the problem back over to them. By asking how, you are forcing their brain to engage in slow, deliberate thinking. You are forcing them to look at the logistical reality of the situation from your perspective.
Which is brilliant, because you are subtly deferring to their expertise to solve your problem, which flatters them.
It flatters them, but ironically, it puts you in complete control of the dynamic.
Okay.
You are making them negotiate against their own extreme anchor.
You make them do the work. And here's where it gets really interesting. Let's say you have taken the punch. You deflected the extreme anchor. You asked, how am I supposed to accept that? And they stammered out a response, softening their stance. Now the momentum shifts. Now it is your turn to go on the offensive and start making offers.
This is where we introduce the system.
Yes, this is where Voss introduces what feels like an actual cheat code, the Ackerman model. This system was developed by an ex-CIA consultant named Mike Ackerman, who spent his career negotiating kidnappings for ransom in some of the most dangerous places on Earth.
High stakes doesn't even begin to cover it.
Right. And when you look at the Ackerman model on a whiteboard, it looks like a standard back-and-forth haggling sequence. But beneath the surface, it is a devastatingly precise psychological trap. It is a 4-step formula. Let's walk through it.
Step 1 is internal preparation.
Step 1, you decide on your absolute target price before you ever enter the room. Say your target is $100,000. Step 2, your opening offer is going to be exactly 65% of your target, so $65,000. You are dropping an extreme anchor of your own.
You are throwing the first controlled punch.
Exactly. Step 3, you plan 3 subsequent raises in mathematically decreasing increments. You go from 65% up to 85%, then up to 95%, and your final offer is 100% of your target.
But we have to explain why these specific diminishing percentages work. What is happening in the counterpart's brain as you make these moves?
Yes, break down the psychology of the math.
The psychology embedded in these diminishing increments is brilliant because it hijacks the counterpart's perception of the negotiation. Let's look at the movement. When you jump from your initial offer of 65% to your next offer of 85%, that is a massive 20% leap.
It feels huge.
To your counterpart, it feels like a monumental concession. You are playing heavily on the social norm of reciprocity. You are signaling, I am willing to move mountains to make this deal work. They feel great about their ability to push you.
They feel like they are winning.
But then, after more haggling, your next move is to 95%. That is only a 10% increase. You've cut your concession in half. And your final agonizing move is to 100%, which is a mere 5% increase.
So the steps get smaller and smaller.
Exactly. To the counterpart, this diminishing size of the increases sends a powerful, subconscious, nonverbal signal. It physically demonstrates that they are pushing you to your absolute breaking point. It feels like they are squeezing every last drop of blood from the stone.
It actually boosts their ego.
They feel like they have fought a grueling battle and won every single inch of ground, even though, in reality, you're landing precisely on the target price you calculated days ago. Yeah. You're managing their emotional satisfaction while protecting your bottom line.
It is absolute emotional management. And then there's the kicker, the final flourish of the Ackerman model. When you make that fourth and final offer, that 100% target, it cannot be a round number. You do not offer $100,000. You end on a weird, highly specific, non-round number.
Like $101,342.
Yes, and Voss tells this mind-blowing story of negotiating a kidnapping ransom in Haiti to demonstrate this. At the time, the going rate for a kidnapping in Haiti was anywhere between $15,000 and $75,000. But Voss had a hard rule. His goal was always to get the hostage out for under $5,000.
A massively ambitious goal.
So he is on the phone with the kidnapper, and he runs the Ackerman system. He drops a low anchor, deflects the threats, and makes his diminishing raises. And when it comes time to close the deal, he does not offer $5,000 flat. He grinds it out and gets the kidnapper to accept exactly $4,751.
Incredible.
The head of the Miami FBI office actually called him the next day, completely baffled. He said, "Voss, you got this guy out for $4,751. How does $1 make a difference in a hostage negotiation?" But it is not about the dollar amount, is it?
Not at all. It is entirely about the perception of calculation. A round number like 5,000 or 100,000 sounds arbitrary. It sounds like a placeholder. When a counterpart hears a round number with a bunch of zeros at the end, their immediate subconscious thought is, they round it up. They have more room in their pockets. I can push them further.
It sounds like a guess.
But a number like 4,751 or 101,342, that does not sound like a guess. That sounds like the result of a rigorous, exhaustive, painful calculation. It signals to the counterpart that you've scraped the bottom of every barrel. You have checked the cushions of your couch, you have liquidated accounts, and this weird number is the absolute unbreakable mathematical limit of your resources.
There's a fantastic example in the text of an MBA student using this exact tactic to negotiate a rent reduction. The landlord wants to hike the rent significantly. The student sits in the office, running the Ackerman model, physically doing fake calculations on a piece of paper, scribbling things out, looking stressed.
Selling the performance.
Totally selling it. Finally, the student looks up and says, "The absolute maximum I can afford is $1,829. The landlord pauses, looks at the student, and says, "Wow, 1,829, you seem very precise." And the landlord accepted it on the spot. The precision creates an illusion of unyielding reality.
That is so powerful. The fake math on the notepad is a great touch. And right at that exact moment when you drop that weirdly specific number, you throw in one more psychological mechanism.
The carry on top.
You toss in a non-monetary item that they probably do not even want. You offer your weird number and you say, "And I am totally tapped out on cash, but I will throw in my old stereo system." Or I can give you the marketing rights to the leftover inventory.
It proves that you are completely empty. You are emptying your pockets and giving them the lint.
It is the ultimate undeniable closure to the haggle. The counterpart's brain accepts that the well is dry.
Okay, so we have survived the bargaining ring. We have traded punches and run the Ackerman model. But now we are elevating to the highest echelon of this methodology. We are entering Chapter 10, the climax of the book's philosophy. This is the realm of the Black Swan, unearthing the impossible.
The unknown unknowns.
Yes. The entire concept is based on Nassim Nicholas Taleb's theory of the Black Swan. Voss's premise is radical. He states that in every single negotiation, without exception, there are between 3 and 5 pieces of hidden information. And if you can uncover just one of them, it will completely fundamentally alter the entire trajectory of the game.
To truly grasp the power of the Black Swan, we have to look at the taxonomy of information in any given scenario. When you prepare for a negotiation, you establish your known knowns. These are the verifiable facts, your counterpart's name, their company's stock price, and their initial stated offer.
The basic facts.
Then you map out your known unknowns. These are the variables, exist, but you don't possess the exact details yet. For example, they might be talking to a competitor, but you don't know the competitor's price. You are anticipating those factors.
But the Black Swans are different.
Entirely different. The Black Swans reside in the category of unknown unknowns. These are the realities, the bizarre constraints, or the deeply hidden desires that are so wildly outside your regular paradigm of expectations that you cannot possibly predict them. You don't even know that you should be looking for them. They are invisible tripwires.
And to illustrate just how catastrophic it can be when you are blind to a black swan, Voss paints this chilling cinematic picture of a real hostage situation. The year is 1981. The location is Rochester, New York. It's the Griffin Bank crisis. A man named William Griffin walks into a bank and takes hostages.
The FBI's elite behavioral unit descends on the scene.
Now, for the FBI at this point in history, their established known knowns form a rigid, unbending playbook. The rule is simple. Hostage takers take hostages to get money or to facilitate a safe escape. They use human lives as leverage to force the police to give them what they want.
It was an absolute psychological certainty for the FBI that a hostage taker will never, ever kill a hostage on a deadline. Because if you kill your leverage, you have nothing left to trade. That was the undeniable truth.
So Griffin sets a hard deadline. He says he wants certain demands met by 3 p.m. The FBI assumes it's a bluff to force their hand. But at exactly 3 p.m., Griffin orders a 29-year-old bank teller, a woman named Margaret Moore, to walk toward the glass doors of the bank.
It's horrific.
She is terrified, crying, begging for her life, telling him she has a young son at home. And Griffin, without a second of hesitation, shoots her right through the glass. He executes her precisely on the deadline. The FBI is paralyzed. Why did this happen? It happened because the FBI was utterly blind to a black swan.
This tragedy is a profound study in the danger of confirmation bias. The failure in Rochester was an over-reliance on past data and rigid institutional expectations. The FBI assumed Griffin was operating under the normal rules of criminal leverage. But Griffin did not want money. He did not want a getaway car to escape.
What you want?
His hidden motivation, his massive paradigm-shattering black swan, was that he wanted to die. But he didn't want to pull the trigger himself. He wanted to force the police to kill him. It was a suicide by cop scenario, a psychological profile that was virtually unstudied and unheard of by law enforcement at that time.
The known knowns literally acted as blinders.
Because they assumed they already understood the fundamental physics of the situation, they ignored the anomalies. They didn't interrogate the shadows of his behavior. To find a black swan, you have to accept a terrifying premise. Your understanding of the world might be fundamentally flawed. Traditional questioning, asking who, what, when, where, is usually designed to confirm what we already suspect.
We just look for answers to the test we already wrote.
Exactly. To uncover a black swan, you have to actively hunt for the anomalies. You have to listen for the things that do not make sense.
Interrogate the shadows. That is exactly what you have to do. And if we extrapolate this from a life-or-death hostage situation to the modern corporate environment, the challenge becomes even more complex. Think about how we negotiate today. The vast majority of business communication is done over email, Slack, or text messages.
Which is a nightmare for finding black swans.
Voss explicitly warns that trying to uncover a black swan over an email thread is virtually impossible. When you communicate via text, you are giving your counterpart a massive tactical advantage. You are giving them time. They have time to read your message, feel the emotional spike, calm down, draft a response, edit that response to remove any emotion, and send back a perfectly sterile defensive reply.
You lose all the behavioral data. You do not get to see the micro-expressions. You do not hear the sudden sharp intake of breath. You do not hear the slight hesitation in their voice before they answer a question.
To spot the tiny cracks in the facade where a black swan might be hiding, you absolutely need FaceTime, or at the very least voice time. You need to pay intense attention to the unguarded moments.
Yes, transitions.
Yes, the black swan doesn't usually reveal itself during the formal PowerPoint presentation. It reveals itself in the 5 minutes of casual small talk before the meeting officially starts, or in the exhausted chatter as everyone is packing up their briefcases to leave the room. That is when the cognitive load is lowered and the truth slips out.
This is a well-known phenomenon in investigative journalism, actually. The most revealing quote, the actual story, almost always comes after the reporter formally closes the notebook and says, "Well, that's all I have. Thanks for your time." The subject relaxes, the mask drops, and they say the one thing they were trying to hide.
They exhale and the truth comes out. And the reason we hunt so aggressively for these black swans is because once you uncover one, it acts as a massive leverage multiplier. It allows you to bend the reality of the negotiation. Which brings us directly into the architecture of leverage itself and how we decode behavior that appears on the surface to be completely irrational.
Leverage is a fascinating concept because it is so often misunderstood.
Let's dive deep into leverage because it is a word that gets thrown around boardrooms constantly, but it is rarely understood. Voss categorizes leverage into three distinct, highly specific types: positive, negative, and normative. Let's break these down. Positive leverage is the easiest to grasp. It is simply your ability to provide something that your counterpart desperately desires.
It is the golden carrot.
If a massive tech conglomerate says, "We want to acquire your startup boom," you have positive leverage. You control the asset they want to possess. Negative leverage, on the other hand, is the ability to inflict a loss or pain. It is the stick. And this is where it gets psychologically heavy because of a concept called loss aversion.
Loss aversion is the well-documented psychological reality that human beings fear losing something vastly more than they desire gaining something of equal value.
If you find a $20 bill on the sidewalk, you feel a brief moment of joy. But if you realize you lost a $20 bill from your wallet, it ruins your entire morning.
The sting of the loss is disproportionately powerful. Therefore, negative leverage is incredibly potent. But you have to wield it with surgical precision. If you blatantly threaten someone with a loss, it triggers their defense mechanisms and destroys the relationship. You have to imply the loss through calibrated questions.
But the third type of leverage, this is the one that fascinates me: normative leverage. This is the art of using their own religion, their own stated worldview, their moral framework, their own rules to bend their reality to your advantage.
Normative leverage is deeply elegant. It requires you to discover the specific ethical or philosophical framework through which your counterpart navigates the world. Everyone has a narrative about who they are. They might see themselves as a tough but fair negotiator. They might see their company as a bastion of environmental sustainability. They might view themselves as a deeply devout, religious individual.
We all have a story about ourselves.
Normative leverage is the process of positioning your demands perfectly within their framework so that if they reject your demand, they're essentially violating their own core principles. To acquire normative leverage, you have to listen with intense focus to the subtext of their words. What are the metaphors they use? What signifies status to them?
When you can accurately echo their own worldview back to them and frame your solution within that worldview, you cease to be an adversary. You become an ally, speaking their native moral language.
And there's a story in the book that illustrates normative leverage better than almost anything else I have ever read. It is the Washington, D.C. tractor standoff.
Let's paint the scene for this one because it's wild. It is post-9/11 America. The tension in the Capitol is already sky high. A disgruntled, heavily armed military veteran named Dwight Watson drives a massive tobacco farming tractor right into a pond on the National Mall.
He claims he has explosives wired to the vehicle.
He paralyzes the city. He creates a massive multi-day standoff with the FBI and SWAT teams. The FBI negotiators are on the radio with him around the clock, but they are not just listening to his demands about farming policies. They are listening to the exact vocabulary he is using. They are analyzing his references, and an FBI agent named Winnie Miller spots the black swan hidden in his language.
She listens to the subtext and realizes that Watson is a deeply devout Christian. His worldview is entirely structured around biblical themes.
And that single realization completely changes the tactical approach of the entire FBI team. They do not threaten him with overwhelming tactical force because negative leverage would likely trigger a violent end. They do not offer him a bribe or a policy change because positive leverage doesn't address his core emotional state.
Instead, Winnie Miller turns to the lead negotiator and says, "Tell him tomorrow is the dawn of the third day."
Wow.
In Christian theology, the third day is profoundly significant. It is the day Christ resurrected and emerged from the tomb. It is the ultimate symbol of salvation, redemption, and emergence from darkness. So the FBI gets back on the radio and says to Watson, "Tomorrow is the dawn of the third day. If Christ came out on the dawn of the third day, why not you?"
And the result is staggering. Watson surrenders peacefully. He walks out of the pond. The FBI didn't argue logic with him. They didn't debate the legality or the politics of his protest. They identified his religion, his normative framework, and they spoke directly into it.
They provided him with a narrative for surrender that perfectly aligned with his internal sense of honor, faith, and redemption.
That is just incredible. They gave him a way to give up that made him feel like a hero in his own story. But I want to pause and talk about the initial reaction to someone like Watson. When a guy drives a tractor into a pond with fake explosives, or to bring it back to the business world, when a counterpart across the boardroom table violently rejects a completely rational, mathematically perfect win-win offer, our brain immediately screams, this person is crazy.
It is our default defense mechanism.
We tell ourselves, I am rational, I am making sense, so they must be completely insane. But Voss hammers home that this is the absolute most dangerous trap in any negotiation.
It is a catastrophic intellectual trap. As Voss emphasizes repeatedly, no one is crazy. The moment you label the person across the table as crazy, you surrender your power. You stop investigating. You give yourself permission to stop looking for the underlying logic driving their actions.
You just write them off.
When a counterpart acts in a way that seems completely irrational to you, it is not madness. It is almost always driven by one of three hidden factors. First, they might be ill-informed. They simply have different incomplete or flawed data than you possess. They are making logical decisions based on a corrupted data set.
They just don't know what you know.
Second, they might be heavily constrained. They are facing immense invisible pressure from a boss, a spouse, a legal department, or a looming financial deadline that you cannot see. They are acting irrationally in your context because they are trying to survive in a different context.
A hidden gun to their head.
Third, they are obeying hidden interests.
Mm.
They actually want an outcome entirely different from what is being formally discussed at the table. Your job as a negotiator is not to play psychiatrist and judge their sanity. Your job is to act as a psychological investigator and uncover which of those three hidden factors is pulling the strings of their seemingly crazy behavior.
And here is a flawless real-world illustration from the book on how to decode that crazy behavior. Voss tells a story about one of his MBA students. This student is analyzing commercial real estate looking for an investment. He finds a property that looks too good to be true. It's a building that is 100% occupied, sitting right next to a rapidly expanding campus in an affluent city. It is an absolute, undeniable cash cow.
But the current owner is trying to offload it quickly.
Right. The student looks at the prospectus and thinks, this is crazy. Why on earth would anyone sell a perfect money printing building? This makes absolutely no sense. There must be something structurally wrong with it. But instead of walking away, the student gets the seller's broker on the phone. And instead of just asking, why are you selling? Which would make the broker defensive, the student uses a label.
Specifically, he uses a mislabel on purpose to provoke a correction.
He says to the broker, it seems like the seller must have some serious doubts about the future market fundamentals of this city to be selling such a cash cow.
That intentional mislabel is a brilliant tactical move. By stating something that is slightly incorrect but highly provocative, it triggers the deep-seated human urge to correct another person. We love to correct people.
We can't help ourselves.
The broker immediately jumps in to defend the asset and says, oh, no, the market here is fantastic.
Yeah.
The problem is the seller has a portfolio of some really tough properties down in Atlanta and Savannah, and they are underwater.
Yeah.
He has to liquidate this property right now to pay back the margins on those other mortgages.
And right there in a split second, the black swan is pulled from the shadows. The seller isn't crazy. The seller isn't stupid. The seller is heavily constrained. He is facing a desperate existential liquidity crisis in a completely different state.
He doesn't want to sell this beautiful building. He needs an injection of cash immediately to save his broader empire. Armed with this newly discovered hidden constraint, the entire landscape of the negotiation shifts.
The student now knows that the seller values speed and immediate cash vastly more than the actual long-term market value of the building. The student drops an extreme lowball anchor, pivots to terms that offer an incredibly fast all-cash closing, and walks away with a massive, multi-million-dollar discount.
Uncovering the constraint literally bends reality. The student bought the building for a fraction of its worth simply because he figured out the seller was suffocating elsewhere.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground. We have the psychological judo of deflecting anchors. We have the intricate math of the Ackerman model. We know how to hunt for black swans, and we understand the nuances of normative leverage. But how do we operationalize all this chaos?
How do you pack your bags before the trip?
Exactly. How do you organize this before you actually walk into the room and the adrenaline hits? This brings us to the final segment drawn from the book's appendix, The Armory, and Preparing the Negotiation One Sheet. Voss has a great saying, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your highest level of preparation. And the very first thing you have to do to prepare is systematically slay a sacred cow of traditional negotiation theory. You have to destroy the concept of the BATNA.
This raises an important question regarding standard negotiation advice. Why would you ever consciously aim for your safety net? The BATNA, which stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, was popularized by the classic negotiation book, Getting to the Table. Yes, It is your backup plan. It is what you will do if you walk away from the table.
Your worst case scenario, basically.
Now, having a backup plan is perfectly fine from a risk management perspective. But traditional negotiation theory teaches you to focus heavily on your BATNA, to calculate it precisely and to keep it front of mind. And psychologically, this is a disaster.
Why is this a disaster?
Under the extreme stress of a high-stakes negotiation, humans have very limited cognitive bandwidth. If you obsess over your BDDTA, it subconsciously becomes your mental target. You anchor your own brain to your absolute lowest acceptable outcome. Voss refers to people who do this as wimp-win negotiators. They focus entirely on their bottom line, on just surviving the deal. Inevitably, because that is where their focus is directed, that is exactly where they end up. They negotiate against themselves before they even open their mouths.
Wimp win. It is such a brutal but accurate term. If you spend all your time staring at the floor, you are never going to hit the ceiling. So the fix, according to Voss, is to abandon the obsession with the BATNA. Instead, you need to establish a specific, wildly ambitious, high-end goal. You need to vividly imagine and fall in love with the absolute best-case scenario.
You write it down at the top of your paper.
You focus all your psychological power and intent on that high-end goal so that any concession away from it feels like a painful loss. This leverages that loss aversion we talked about earlier, but uses it on yourself to keep you pushing forward. And once you have that goal, you build your pre-flight checklist. You build your negotiation one-sheet. You do not walk into a high-stakes environment and try to wing it on charm alone. You prepare your armory in advance. Let's break down exactly what goes on to this one-sheet.
The one-sheet is a concise, highly structured document that operationalizes your psychological investigation. It's usually just one page. At the very top, as you mentioned, is your wildly ambitious high-end goal. Next, you pre-write 3 to 5 labels. You try to anticipate the emotional dynamics that will be present in the room, and you write out phrases like, "It seems like you value speed in this transition," or "It sounds like you are reluctant to commit to a long-term contract." Having these pre-written prevents you from freezing up.
It gives you a script to fall back on when you panic.
Then, crucially, you write out your accusation audit. This is perhaps the most difficult part of the preparation because it requires profound empathy. You brainstorm every single terrible, unfair, negative, or skeptical thought your counterpart could possibly harbor about you, your company, or your proposal. You write them down, and you prepare to say them out loud, unprompted, right at the start of the meeting to diffuse their amygdala.
I want to linger on the accusation audit for a second because doing that in practice is terrifying. Imagine sitting down with a client who is angry about a delayed shipment, and instead of defending yourself, you open the meeting by saying, "You probably think we are completely incompetent, that we don't respect your timelines, and that hiring us was the worst decision you made this year."
It feels completely unnatural to verbally arm your opponent with those insults.
But neurologically, it takes all the venom out of their bite. They don't have anything left to attack you with because you just said it all for them.
And finally, you draft 3 to 5 calibrated questions designed specifically to unearth deal killers and implementation issues. Questions like, "What are we up against here?" Or, "What happens if you simply do nothing and walk away?" When you have these highly engineered tools written down in front of you, you don't have to rely on your raw processing power when the adrenaline spikes. You just glance at your sheet and deploy the tools.
So what does this all mean when we put it together?
Yeah.
It means you aren't walking into a fight anymore. You are walking into a meticulous psychological investigation. You are completely armed. You have your labels ready to gather intelligence and map their reality. You have your accusation audit to clear out the emotional static and fear. You have your calibrated questions to guide their thinking and give them the illusion of control. And you have your Ackerman plan mapped out for when the numbers finally hit the table. You are no longer just reacting. You are an emotional architect.
And that concept of being an emotional architect beautifully wraps up the entire underlying thesis of Voss's method, tying all 4 of our deep dives together perfectly. The fundamental paradigm shift of Never Split the Difference is the realization that human beings are not rational, math-driven robots executing logical scripts. We like to think we are, but we aren't. We are profoundly emotional, highly irrational, yet highly predictable creatures.
We are just messy humans.
We are driven constantly by deep-seated fears, by the powerful gravity of loss aversion, by complex, unarticulated needs, and by a desperate, burning desire to be understood, respected, and heard. Traditional negotiation assumes that if you just present a better, more logical argument, you will browbeat your enemy into submission. But Voss proves that negotiation is not a battle of logic. It is an exercise in tactical empathy. It is the ultimate, most active, and most demanding form of listening. It is about actively recognizing The specific, unique worldview of the person sitting across from you, stepping into their reality, and then gently, methodically guiding them toward your solution so that they fundamentally believe it was their idea all along.
I want to speak directly to you listening right now. Whether you are navigating a multi-million-dollar corporate merger, sitting in a dealership trying to buy a car, asking your manager for a raise, or simply trying to get your stubborn toddler to put on their shoes and go to sleep, you are playing an emotional game. Life is a continuous series of negotiations, and you have the absolute fundamental right to ask for what you want, provided you ask for it correctly, maintaining that unconditional positive regard for the person across from you. You do not have to accept the middle ground. You do not have to compromise your vision and just split the difference. If you master these tools, you can literally bend reality.
It is a profound and incredibly empowering realization when you finally see that every single interaction is not a conflict to be avoided, but an opportunity for deep connection and discovery.
It really is. It changes how you view every conversation. And we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on after this deep dive ends. I want you to mentally picture the most difficult, stubborn, seemingly impossible person in your life right now. It could be a micromanaging boss, an estranged family member, or an infuriating client. The person you have secretly deep down in your mind labeled as completely irredeemably crazy. Think about them. Now ask yourself, what if they aren't crazy at all? What if they are just heavily constrained by pressures you can't see or operating on a completely different set of information? What if they are holding a massive black swan that you just haven't bothered to look for? What is the unknown unknown sitting right in front of you waiting to be unearthed by a simple, carefully calibrated how?
That is the question that unlocks the impossible deals.
It changes everything. Thank you so much for joining us on this massive dopaminergic sprint through the world of tactical empathy. You now have the armory. You have the tools. Go out there, interrogate the shadows, unearth those black swans, and never ever split the difference. We will see you on the next deep dive.